first announcement is that this meeting is being televised on local TV for those of you who are interested. Any comments or questions you have, please direct them to the commission in any of the hearings or items for discussion tonight. And if you do have a item for discussion, please come up to the mic, because the audience at home can't hear you speak from the field. You gotta speak at a mic, okay? The first item of agenda is a notice of intent filed by the town of Ashland for streetscapes improvements along Main Street, Myrtle Street, and Front Street.
Good evening. My name is Bill Paley. I'm with BSC Group, and I'm here to address 3 issues that were brought up at the last hearing.
Mm-hmm.
You have a packet in front of you. It has a cover letter, a revised NOI form, the revised stormwater report, and also the no rise, no impact form, signed, sealed, and endorsed. I'm going to read from the cover letter, just for the record, to address these 3 issues. First issue was the NOI application, page 4, section B. Buffer zone and resource area impacts, subsection incorrectly identified the cubic feet of flood storage lost in the unit of cubic yards. Therefore, the 1574 cubic feet that was submitted into the application really should be 42,498 cubic feet. Similarly, the flood storage replaced should be 47,574 cubic feet. And the form is attached. The second issue that was addressed was the stormwater report. It has been revised to eliminate any reference to the use of hay bales for site stabilization. The copy of the report's attached. So there were several locations where we eliminated the word hay bales, and also there was a detail in the report that was deleted from the report. So there were 7 locations. I can provide those if you really need them for cross-checking, but those have been removed. The revised report is on your desk, and also I've given a revision date of December 6th. The last issue was regarding the no rise, no impact form that the Conservation Commission asked us to complete. So I'll read this. We anticipate this project will not impact the base flood elevations, floodway elevations, and floodway widths of the Sudbury River, and therefore result in a quote-unquote no rise, no impact for several reasons. First, the grades in the project area are only being lowered by 1 inch on average. Also, there will be no increase in impervious area. All of the roadway runoff will be collected into deep sump catch basin structures that will discharge to a stone swale before discharging into the Sudbury River. Compensatory flood storage requirements are being met, and thus there is no change in flood elevation. Additionally, there is no increase in post-development flow rates within the project drainage area, which is exponentially smaller than the overall Sudbury River watershed, and therefore will not affect peak flows in the Sudbury River floodway during a 100-year storm event. Those are the 3 issues that we addressed. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Was a copy of the no rise certificate provided to the, I guess, is it the town, the building inspector?
The building inspector, for everybody's purpose here that's in the audience, is the certified flood plan manager for our town. He did get an electronic copy of it through email. I did not receive any responses back. I suspect he hasn't had a chance to look.
Okay. Any other questions? I think that,
that form need to be notarized and submitted, or?
well, it's stamped. It doesn't need to be notarized.
Okay.
At least I'm not aware that it needs to be notarized. It is stamped and signed.
All right.
I think that answers the questions that we had at the last meeting.
It does. These were the only 3 things that we have asked for from the previous hearing.
Any other questions? No? No? Any questions from the audience on this? This is for the streetscape improvements for downtown? No? Okay, seeing none, and I don't have any other comments. Do I hear a motion to close the hearing?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. So it's 6-0-0. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill.
The second item on the agenda is an ANRAD filed by the town of Ashland for 12 to 16 Union Street for a wetland delineation confirmation. We were supposed to go on a site walk on Saturday, but due to the depth of snow, it really is not conducive to verifying a wetland line right now. We're hoping the rain that we had today and tomorrow are going to significantly settle down the snow or wash it away, and maybe we can reschedule a site walk for this weekend tentatively, given field conditions. If they don't improve appreciably, I think we're gonna still have to delay it until we can actually see something on the ground.
We're talking warmer temperatures over the weekend and some rain.
Good. Rain both days?
No, I think Saturday.
All right, why don't we try for Sunday?
It's got Saturday and Sunday.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
This morning I thought, just Saturday.
It's 53 on Saturday and 46 on Sunday. But it is rain both days.
I mean, if you're game for trying to walk the site in the rain,
I'm not gonna be there.
I'll get my marks.
do you want to try to reschedule something for Sunday?
What's the date on Sunday?
15th.
15th.
There you go. Can you guys make it?
Sure.
All right,
I can make it.
I can make it.
you gonna make it?
Sunday morning
But
would
you
be
gonna
better.
make a call on this at some point?
Yeah, I mean, if it turns out that it still is really not good conditions for verifying wetland lines, we'll have to delay it again. I just don't wanna, I wanna keep this thing moving along and try to come to, conclusion on this and not have to wait till next spring.
What time Sunday morning?
9 o'clock,
Okay.
does that work?
We're gonna meet, it's not plowed there.
Yeah, but the snow might be enough that we can get in there. Is there a big bank there where from
Well,
the
the
street?
sidewalk is plowed,
The sidewalk is.
so if it continues to rain and melt, we may be able to get in over there.
All right. Again, we'll just play that by ear and see. If it's still not, if we can do the sidewalk but we can't park on the site, we'll try to come up with something else.
We could park at the cemetery
There you go.
and come in from the back.
Okay.
That's pretty steep though, isn't it? From the cemetery?
To get to the site?
Yeah, I thought it was fairly steep.
Well,
Doesn't it drop down significantly?
What?
Doesn't it drop down significantly from the site, from the cemetery, into
We can
that
get in there.
property? From the cemetery we can?
Yeah.
Okay.
all right. We got a few minutes.
Oh, you want me to continue it?
Oh, yeah, true. I'll entertain a motion to continue the discussion on the ANRAD until, what's the next meeting date?
The 23rd.
Yeah, let's do it on the 23rd.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Is Michael here?
I don't see
Upstairs.
him.
Yes, okay. All right. I'm sure he doesn't mind. That's right, 23. we're pretty close to 7:15.
Good thing you fixed the clock, huh?
I know. Okay, the next item on the agenda is a request for determination of applicability from Marissa Hannon for 40 Pond Street for a proposed fence. Do we have that?
Yes, I just passed around revised plans and they were submitted at
that's
the
what
last
this is.
meeting.
Okay.
Ready for me?
Yeah.
Okay,
sure.
my name's Marissa Hannon. I'm here from Doggy Dates. We're a local dog play group company. We have setups in other local towns, and we're trying to move in this direction. We have clients in Ashland, so we were looking for some properties, and we stumbled upon 40 Pond Street. So, from what I understand, this property has been unused for many years. It's pretty overgrown. There is a small greenhouse building on the property that we're not planning to use. Doggy Dates is strictly an outdoor play group. So we are not going to build any buildings. We won't house the dogs. We're not putting up any roofs, anything like that. The only thing that we want to put up is fencing. There already is fencing on the property, so we will utilize that to an extent, but we will also need to expand it a little bit. Essentially what we want to do is be able to send up to 4 to 5 cars at a time. Probably in the beginning it will only be 2 to 3. And we'll bring the dogs to play, and the whole idea is that they're contained the entire time and that they can play off leash but contained without being able to run freely. We like to rent private property to do this so that we can keep the dogs strictly from our business, so we're not dealing with dogs from other owners. We know that our dogs are friendly, we know our dogs are vaccinated, so it would be a private playgroup facility just for our group. We would not, I don't know if this is important for you guys to know, but we would not have the customers come to the property. It would only be our work vehicles. We pick the dogs up at home, we bring them to play for 45 minutes, and then we pack them up and bring them home again. We do this in all weather, so that we were out there today in the rain and the snow. The dogs still need to get out. As long as the roads are safe, we'll operate. So if you see the map, I've tried to make it a little clearer for you with color to show what we're actually looking to do. So the blue outlined area is already an asphalt paved parking lot. We would want to put a fence around it, and this we wouldn't dig into the ground. We would use cinder block bases so that there's no digging that goes on there, and then there would be a swinging gate on either end for the cars to drive through. The red area and the green area would be the play areas. I outlined one in red because that will be where they first enter. So the dogs will pull in, we'll close the gates behind the cars, the dogs will get out and enter into that red area, and that will be their first spot, so they can go to the bathroom. And that's the furthest area away from the wetlands, which is why we selected that end of the field. And then the green area would be where the rest of the play area is. So then they would open up a gate, and we'll probably divide it into sections so that the dogs aren't all in one area. We can split them up by size, by play style. And I've suggested the fence go right along the, I believe that's the 25-foot no disturb, so it's not beyond that into the wetlands, but it's about as close as we can get to it, so we can fully utilize that space. And I think that's about it. So I don't know if you guys have any questions for me.
Where is this across from Demoulas?
Market basket.
Or
Yeah.
Market Basket?
Where that old fruit stand was?
Yeah,
So yeah, there's like a
Okay.
small building. I think they probably sold farm goods there. There's some fencing that's already there, and then it's just really overgrown and
And
like weeds.
is Russell Road, that's a paper road, isn't it? There's no real road there?
No, I don't. No, I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think
There's a
so.
house
That's,
over
we
there.
were out there once when
Yeah.
we were off of Walcott Street. Remember we
Yeah.
came around? There's a lot of old pottery and stuff back there. This is not cleared, correct?
No,
It would have to be cleared.
not really. So we'll take the weeds out, but the trees and everything we'll leave them. The dogs like it. It's just an place to be outside for them to play and run. We just have to be able to obviously access it. So there are a lot of weeds and things that have grown over the years that we'd have to
I
cut.
thought it was
But no
pretty
trees.
overgrown.
Yeah.
My impression of it is it's just a wall of vegetation basically face on with that building.
Yeah.
How many dogs do you expect to have there, and how long will they be? And how
So
many
you-
will be there in a day?
Sorry, say that one more time.
How many dogs will be there in a day?
Per day, well, we do it by trip, so we would probably in the beginning want to do 2 to 3 cars. Each car can do up to 3 trips a day, and each car can handle 6 to 8 dogs. So, 6 times 3, 18, maybe 50, 60 dogs, but not all at the same time.
Do you have provision to keep the solid waste out, or?
So the process that we currently follow is our staff is with their group. So we kind of envision we take Toyota Scions. So we have a driver with their 6 to 8 dogs. The driver is responsible for monitoring the dogs and then picking up all waste as it's deposited. And we keep them in trash cans lined with trash bags. And then when the bags are full, there's a company that will come twice weekly. They're called duty calls. And they, I know, it's funny. And it's for real. And they haul the,
Have 'em.
yeah, they'll come to private residences and clean it for you, but we clean it so it's not left on the ground, and then they take the bags and do what they do with them. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, how does the rainwater flow in that area? In which direction does it flow? Does it go
The
towards?
flow.
Yeah.
Is
does
Scott
rain-
Jordan in the house? He can attest he's the wetlands engineer. I'm not versed in wetlands.
Scott, you'll need to come up to the podium, please.
I meant from this particular area where you are
The potty
using the
part?
potty part, yeah.
The water flow, is that what you
Yeah, rainwater that
So,
flows in which
stormwater
direction does it
basically.
flow?
That's the stormwater charge.
Hi,
Not
Scott
the
Jordan from
land,
Ecotech. So if you're looking at the diagram, the southern portion of the property, we delineated what is stormwater discharge from the street, and then becomes an intermittent stream. And it has a very narrow fringe of BVW along it. And there is some stormwater runoff coming from the west, from Pond Street and across that paved parking area. It flows onto the site also.
So would the contamination would be minimal?
Yeah, it looks like it,
I don't know.
I would say, yeah, if it's flowing from
Alright.
here to there.
I don't know, it's from here, I'm
Well,
looking at
That's
this,
in
that.
cans. That's in
Whatever,
cans,
the
though.
wetland is probably the low point, so whatever falls on the land is probably gonna find its way to the
So
wetland.
from this area, it's going to go in there. That's
Yeah.
what I want to make sure the contamination is minimal.
That's where I think, in the potty area, I think she's got containers where the bags are put in.
Right, but the
Speak into the mics.
urine passage,
Nobody can
Yeah,
hear you.
so-
liquid waste cannot be contained in the thing, they don't
That's
collect
true.
it.
liquid.
That's the one that
They
is.
can't pick
that-
up.
The concern, I mean,
Right,
you're
that-
addressing the solid,
you're
but
right.
it's the liquid,
Liquid.
where would that flow when it rains?
Right, well, the potty area, as she's diagrammed here in red, is furthest away from the wetland as possible. Runoff, it appears, from the parking area is highlighted in purple. Runoff appears to flow in this direction here. There's a little low spot in this area here. So clearly, this is nowhere near that runoff area. This is a little bit higher, the parking area here.
As long as it doesn't impact, I don't see a problem. The only
Well-
reason, it's a good area to have something for animals to enjoy their land area, but
This is in the upper reaches of Washaken, right?
On the other side,
It's on
Oh.
the-
other side of
No,
126.
It goes on the other side,
Goes to
this,
The stream
This
that goes
goes more
back to
toward
this.
Beaver Dam Brook and Framingham
Yeah.
than it does to
Have you been
Wishaken.
out there?
I have not. I was gonna go out there this week, but the snow delayed me. That was one question that I wanted to ask the commission too, is to see if anybody wanted to go out there to the site, just because of the nature of the work. The fencing itself isn't a concern really, under the Wetlands Protection Act, but the dog and the dog waste is a concern. I wasn't sure if the commission would wanna do a site visit out there. It is a busy road. You would have to be very careful.
I have a question for Scott, is it? You've identified it, is that an isolated wetland?
Yes, a very small isolated wetland, and I think that's associated with the stormwater runoff that dives off Pond Street and then flows across the parking area there. Just kind of like a goldenrod type of
Okay.
meadow thing.
Is
As you
it
said,
mo-
it's very overgrown there, probably hasn't
Is
been
it
mowed.
wet or just got? you know-
Yeah, it is wet.
Okay.
But the bylaw requirement for isolated wetlands, is there a size threshold? I
Not
don't
for
recall.
isolated wetlands, but for isolated lands subject to flooding.
Yes, it's clearly much less than the isolated land subject to flooding threshold.
But the plan here is, if I'm reading this correct, is to fence across that wetland?
So,
The
The-
green line goes through the edge of it.
at what point?
See where it says on the plan, wetland flag D4, and I think that says D3.
Okay, maybe, yeah, I might have just misread that line. So I can adjust
It's
this,
one
the
or two,
fencing
I
to
don't
go,
mind,
I
like
wanted it
50.
to go all along that buffer and not
Mm.
into the, because I don't want to go past the 25 foot. So I think that's I see that corner that you're looking at there. I just missed the line.
Well,
No, it's still on the
it's
20.
still on the 25 foot, but it's going through a wetland. It's not a regulated wetland,
It's not a regulated wetland, correct?
but it's still a wetland.
Okay, so where could I cut that off, or would
Well,
it be?
I guess my question is, do you want your dogs running around in a wetland?
No, absolutely not. No, so I was just following this map, trying to, like you can see, there's a lot of blinds on it. I didn't want to be in the wetlands, and I wanted to
Okay.
be 25 feet away. So if there's a spot that I'm missing it, I can
Maybe
just
we can
adjust the plan. It's just that right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be an easy fix.
If we could adjust that fence to follow up that northerly boundary, that finger, that would get it out.
Okay.
Is the wetland flagged?
Yes.
Is, I think it's a good idea to take a look at it. Maybe we can do it the same day that we do the,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Is that the only spot that you noticed that it cuts into the wetland? Because I want to fix that. I definitely don't want fencing. in
Well,
there.
I don't see any other area, but
Okay.
Yes, it is.
Okay,
that's the only place that I see.
okay.
Yeah, and the building is gonna remain, is that correct?
Yeah, we're not touching the building.
Are you buying this property, or you're leasing it, or
Lease.
you're gonna lease it? Okay. Okay, well, I would certainly like to take a look at it. Can you actually get through this property, or is it,
Yeah, there's a lock on. You walk through it.
it looks, no, but I mean, it's pretty overgrown. It looked pretty thick to me.
There's some prickly spots, yeah. Yeah, flagging
Looking
along,
at it from the road.
flagging along the channel
Do-
it was tough at times.
I mean, nothing's been done on
But
that
it's-
property for years that I'm
Yeah.
aware of.
Do we need permission from the landowner to walk in? or something?
I can get it.
Yeah, if we can get permission from the landowner, because we can't go onto site
And
without
do they have to
their
sign the
permission.
papers too?
Do you
No.
want?
I
uh,
just, no,
Do
they
you
don't.
want us? Do you want me to be there, or I don't mind either way. But
It's up to you.
okay.
Leave that up to you.
it might be helpful. The
Yeah, no, I think I
problem is if we do it after we go to the other property, we're not exactly sure when we'll get there unless
Right.
you could give your phone number to Meg and we could call you or something.
Could
Okay.
we, this is a smaller one,
That's
so
this
could we
weekend?
finish this and then go that side? Is that possible?
We could, but we'd have to reschedule, I think, the other side. Do you want to go here first?
I think so, because this is a smaller one compared to the other one. I think we should be able to finish it sooner. That way, they don't have to wait for,
Okay,
Well-
do you want to do that? You want to meet
Well,
here?
we've got to, whatever we do, we've got to coordinate it with the town because I think that there are people from the town that want to be at the
At
ANRAD
the other- yeah.
delineation.
Yep.
I'm flexible, so whatever works for you guys.
Well, why don't we say we'll be here from 9 to 9:30, and then we have to leave to go over to the other site.
Okay.
Okay.
That way, we can be, commit to a time.
Sunday,
Is it easier for us to park at Market Basket and cross the street than to
It
park?
depends on how many cars. There's definitely space for like a good 5-6 cars in front of the building.
Yeah,
So.
Is it plowed?
Oh, that's a good
Oh, that's
question.
good.
Because I wasn't there. I haven't been there since it snowed.
I
I
would say
can-
no if you don't know the
Yeah.
answer
Yeah,
to
no,
that.
I can
Maybe
find
park
out.
at the
but
plaza.
You're
We'll
probably
have to just,
right.
we'll just have to see. I doubt it's
All right,
planned.
well, we can play that by ear when we get there. If it's not open, we'll park across the street. Okay. All right, so why don't we, we'll continue this until the next meeting on the 23rd. And we'll meet here at 9 on the 15th?
yeah.
Yep. Is there anything else you need from me in the meantime besides that adjustment on the fence there? Just wanna make sure.
I'd say wait for them to do the site visit before you make
Yeah.
that adjustment too.
Gotcha. Okay, can do that.
So which direction is the stream flow? Is it flowing to
The
the
stream
east, to the
flows
east?
in an easterly direction.
And it's Charles River watershed?
No, it's out of the Charles River watershed. It's within the Sudbury River watershed and out of Wishakam's watershed.
Out of Wishakam's.
Correct, because it's the headwaters to, or the beginning of the headwaters, part of the headwaters to Beaver Dam Brook, which runs to Framingham.
So this stream, you said it starts as stormwater runoff?
Yeah,
There's no
so
source anywhere else?
Right, there's nothing mapped on USGS, and I went behind the plaza and poked around, there was no culverts or anything, I was wondering
Yeah.
what the source was. You know, there's clearly drainage in the road.
Yep,
And, some structures, manholes and stuff.
probably where the
and,
parking lots go to.
So it seems to be clear that that's stormwater for a period, and then once we get the vegetation, we have
Yep.
BVW, and now we have a stream and work backwards, so.
Do you also anticipate to use some chemicals, anything from this area too?
Chemicals? No.
No. Just because you said it's closer to Washington, so
Just
we want to
dog
protect
yummies.
the Washington.
Okay, all right, with that, I'll entertain a motion to continue
So moved to December
the-
23rd,
to
right?
the 23rd.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
So,
Six
Megan,
zero.
that's Sunday at 9?
Sunday.
So I'll
Sunday
be in-
at 9.
Okay, so I'll get permission and I'll be in touch to make sure.
Great.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Meg, you going on these site walks
Yes,
on Sunday?
gonna
Okay.
be going
You have
on
her
Sunday.
contact information.
yes, I do, and I'll be there too.
Is she required to send the permission to us, or she's going to hold it?
I'm gonna forward it to the commission as soon as I receive it.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is 95-931, an NOI filed by the Massachusetts Department of Transportation for Route 126 Pond Street drainage, traffic, and safety improvements. I am going to recuse myself. I have a conflict, and turn it over to Bill.
Yes.
See you guys later. The next item is.
I do, yes. I just need it to turn on.
Bye-bye. See ya. Right. Yeah, but he can't sit on the next one either.
Why would I stay?
Oh, there we go. So we'll delete. Megan, did you say it's Ashland? Yes. There's the Thank you. Oh, is that earlier today? Okay. Okay. This is what you asked me to bring 6 copies of.
Keep on passing it down.
Oh, this, okay. Not sure. Pass it down, guys, pass it down.
This is all one?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, there we go. So it's not this. Good evening. We're back here again. We have, Megan, if it's all right with you, I was just gonna jump right into where we left off, or did you need us to give a refresher of everything?
If you can, just give a quick refresher.
Okay, do you wanna just give a brief?
Paul Maluski with Green International Affiliates. We're the design consultants hired by Mass DOT for this project. Prior to that, we were actually under contract with the town to develop 25% plans. This is a project Green has been involved with the town and Mass DOT for several years now, with Green's involvement dating back to about 2014. Something the town has been advocating for long before that. The purpose of the project is basically to improve corridor safety, improve aesthetics, provide continuous bicycle and pedestrian accommodations, enhance the character of the corridor, and improve the economic vitality of the area. As I mentioned, the project was originally under contract with the town. We developed the 25% plans, submitted those back in 2015. A design public hearing was held back in 2016. So what we have up here is just a location map of the area. The project starts at the Holliston town line. It extends for about, to the south, and extends for about 9,000 feet or 1.7 miles to the north to the Framingham town line. The project abuts a combination of both residential and commercial properties. There are currently limited sidewalks throughout the corridor, no bicycle accommodations. The proposed design will include 11-foot travel lanes, 5-foot shoulders to accommodate bicycles, and sidewalks on both sides for the entire stretch of the corridor. There are a few key intersections along the corridor. It's to the south, there's Spyglass Hill, which we will be proposing a roundabout at. Further to the north is the Elliott Street intersection, which will be reconfiguring some lanes, improving traffic operations there, proposing some new traffic signals. And then again, further to the north, we have Algonquin Drive. We're going to be realigning Algonquin Drive to come in to an intersection with High Street directly across, so that we have essentially a four-way intersection to improve safety there and propose a signal. And finally, the Market Basket intersection further to the north, which we will be improving traffic operations again there by proposing all new signal equipment. This is the third hearing for this project. Prior to that, as you may know, we had some, we were proposing replication at the Algonquin location. However, it was determined that that wasn't actually a wetland, so we eliminated that. We moved all the wetland replication to Butterfield Drive, but at the last hearing, there were some concerns about that location as well. So it was requested that we look at the location behind the fire station at 70 Cedar Street, I believe is the address. So that looked like a feasible option. So at that point, I'm going to turn it over to Danielle, who might be able to speak a little bit more to that.
Thank you. Danielle Spicer with Green International. Before we jump to that item, I thought it would be appropriate just to go through some of the still outstanding comments that we just submitted responses to on Friday. So I'm going to jump right in, number 12, and if there's anything, anyone has any questions on stuff beforehand, but number 12 is one of the first that was still outstanding. Are you all set with?
And just to give a background on comment 12, since I know folks in the audience who haven't been here for these hearings before might be interested in these hearings now that you're physically here. Comment 12 just had to do with stream crossing standards and also had to deal with details on the plans. I saw that you revised the sheet for detail 11 on sheet 189. I took a look at that, and that looks like for those two culvert replacements that were all set there. But for culvert number 4, I believe it is, there's no detail, and it's because it's on the previous sheets, correct?
No, culvert number 4 is not having a natural stream bottom because it's collecting closed drainage system from the market basket. So it's called out in the just pipe sizes on the plan.
Okay.
So it's a specific note. So typically when we don't detail materials, we would just note the size of like if it's a precast box structure, or if it's, you know, the arch culvert, we would just note the size and type and the material and the length. We wouldn't provide a detail. The culverts at 2 stations where we are replacing in kind and providing a natural stream bottom, those are a little bit different because we're providing baffles to be able to show the natural stream bottom. And that's where, you know, it's also of a concern for you guys to review, so that's where we provided more detailed information. But we would not typically do that for the one at Station 90.
Okay, and the rest of the commission okay with that? When I looked at those sheets, it looked a little bit busy in relation to culvert number 4. But if the commission doesn't need another detail on that, I'm okay with that.
I'm fine with it.
Okay,
Okay.
12 is closed.
Next one's 21.
Oh, did we go to? You have it crossed out. Oh, are you,
You had 21 highlighted.
Yep, 21 had to deal with DP 13 and their stormwater report. They've revised it. The comment is closed.
.25 is the next one?
Yep.
Correct. Let me just take a look at my copy here.
And we revised that detail on Plan 188, so it's consistent with the spec. We submitted that, so you have it crossed out and being closed.
Yep, 25 is now closed.
I think the next one's 50.
50.
50 is a bit of a strange comment because it had to do with an initial wetland replication area that was proposed by Algonquin Trail. However, that wetland that you see as wetland L in that locus map in front of you has since been removed. We do not consider that a wetland system because it did not have the right soils and did not have the right vegetation. So this comment then became kind of a moot point, but then tied into the previous hearing that had to do with another replication area being looked at for Cedar Street. So I've closed out this comment and then added an additional comment that has to deal with the Cedar Street replication. We'll get to that later.
Okay. I think 55 is the next one, and that was just,
51,
Oh, sorry?
actually.
Yeah,
Sorry?
51.
yes, 51, where we were just giving a more detailed explanation. I think we explained it during the hearing, but I think you were, Megan, just asking for it in writing of why the different alternatives for this project, what they were, you know, why we ended up with the impacts that we did. So this was just further explanation of stuff that we've already explained.
Correct. 51 is closed.
Is 55 the next one?
Yep.
Okay. And this one, we were just agreeing with what you had noted above.
Yep, and 55 is closed, which had to do with the wildlife habitat evaluation. Mass DOT needed to provide one because of the amount of impacts that they had to banks, to streams. That has since been provided. I had no comments on the wildlife habitat evaluation, but conditions will come out of that order of conditions if the commission approves an order of conditions. 55 is closed. Then that brings us to comment number 56, which you have in front of you. I
This
just
is
handed it to
a
you.
brand new one, right? Just
On the
tonight?
brand new
Okay.
one. It was in the packet that was submitted to you, dated today, actually. comment number 56, I'll read it out loud, says, "At the last hearing scheduled on November 25th, the Conservation Commission and the applicant and their representatives stated comments for a different replication area in a town property in back of Cedar Street. The Select Board approved a temporary easement on December 4th, 2019. Can you let me know what the status is? I know it's still kind of early, it's only a week away from that hearing."
The status from the previous hearing? Yes, there was a board vote. Hold on, I actually have. is it? Yes, the town manager noted that he agreed to sign a right of entry agreement, and the select board also voted to allow an easement on the property as well, last Wednesday.
And where does that agreement stand with DOT right now?
I think it's still in the works with,
Yeah, I believe Mass DOT is going to be providing the town with a right of entry letter or form.
which Michael Hubert, the town manager, has noted that he is willing to agree and to sign to. I thought he had sent this email to you today. I have a hard copy if you want.
He sent an email to me.
Oh, okay, you were CC'd as well, basically
Confirmed
noting.
that he said that, yeah.
Yeah, so the actual signing of the easement has not taken place yet, but we are moving forward with that.
Okay.
So if you want, I know a couple of these comments, the last couple of comments kind of all play into this area. So to take a step back, at the last hearing, as Paul had previously mentioned, the Butterfield location, there were some concerns with, so it was noted that we could potentially look at this area up here, which is behind the fire department along Cedar Street. If you look up here, this is just that map that I had up previously. The red dashed line shows the limit of work. You can see this large wetland system goes all the way from Pond Street actually up to Cedar Street. So this just shows that this is, while we would be replicating in this area and it's not along the corridor, it is hydraulically connected to the wetland systems where we are filling along Pond Street. So in a blown up area, this is just GIS information at this point because we just haven't had time to move forward with the flagging and the survey. But with the GIS information, this is showing the parcel area, so there is plenty, I guess, of land area. This is using the green area as the GIS information for the wetland system. You can see the 10-foot, the 10-foot contours from GIS. This is showing roughly a 4,000 square foot replication area, which is basically what we're doing at the Butterfield location. So with the commission's approval to move forward, we are requesting that, based off of this plan, with your approval, we'll move forward with flagging and then doing a full design that we would be submitting afterwards.
How old is that public safety building there? Do you know? Or does the commission know?
25 years old, maybe?
It's that old? I thought it was newer.
Are you talking about this one or this building?
Yep, that building right there.
Okay.
The reason why I ask is because we might have older permits filed if that took place close enough to wetland resource areas. It looks like the parking lot may fall close enough where some sort of permit would have been pulled.
So, just so that we're clear, you'd be doing the replication at Cedar Street instead of doing
Correct. We would be doing, once we submitted final design plans with, topo and survey and flagged wetlands, we'd do the full 4,000 square foot here, and then once you reviewed it and approved that plan, we would remove the replication at Butterfield.
Okay. I appreciate you doing that, thank you. I think it's a much better location. I think some of us do.
I did just want to make the commission aware, in this area, it is anticipated, just because I think it was brought up at the last one, tree removal in the Butterfield location. There will be tree removal here as well. I don't think it's feasible to not have that, so I just wanted to bring that. We've tried to locate this up in this area. One, we wanted to be away from this house. I believe the fire department uses that for training. And I believe based on the site visit that was done early in November, it was deemed that this area up in the north would be the best area for replication. So we've tried to keep it somewhat narrow, so we're not taking too much, but we obviously want it to be a viable replication area, so we need to have some sort of width. So there will be anticipated some tree removal along
Yeah,
there.
but this is more or less flat ground compared to the other one, right?
It's a much more gradual
I
grade.
believe it's
That-
much more
that-
gradual.
that's-
You don't
steadily
have
divided,
the,
it's better.
you don't have the 2 to 1.
other one was a much steeper
steep,
grade,
yeah.
you'd be cutting back
Yeah.
quite a bit.
Correct, it is a more gradual.
And the
there's-
upland in the other place is actually acting as a buffer zone for the wetland
From the
from
road.
126,
Yes.
including those trees. So that's why it was important to some of us anyway, that the trees remain and the buffer zone remain.
Sure, yep.
Is it
This-
I'm
Oh,
sorry,
go
go
ahead,
ahead. Is it the triangle as well as that strip, or is the triangle just pointing to?
Triangle's just pointing to that,
Okay.
sorry, that's a very large leader
Just
line. It's
Okay.
just the,
The area, the strip. going this
strip,
way, okay.
yes.
Good, thank you.
No, we wouldn't be going into the parking lot.
I know, I was like, what is, okay. Just checking. Go ahead.
Have you been out to the site?
I have not at this point.
I would.
You have.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is pretty much forested right now, just kind of young forest.
I believe so, I haven't.
Yeah,
It's,
I haven't-
yeah, it's,
but it's not wet now.
well, we would have to figure that out. It still needs to be flagged over there, right?
Correct,
Yeah.
we,
I mean,
and,
it's adjacent to that entire
It-
complex, so some of it's wet.
oh, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely, and the intent is, I mean, while this is GIS information, it's not a final design, so our intent is with the approval of the commission, if you are, approve this location, condition full design plans that will have flagging, that will actually have a survey of this area with a full design.
I think this is much more suitable, yeah, I think this is good,
Probably it's more cost effective too.
yeah.
It's more easily accessible for
Yeah.
whoever's doing the work
Yep.
as well.
It's gonna work.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, that's,
The other one wasn't really gonna work.
Anybody else have any other comments? Any comments from the public? Okay. So, you're gonna be working on a order conditions? Okay.
Correct.
So I'll entertain a,
Let me just ask one more question. If for some reason, that's not a suitable site, I think that it probably will be, but if for whatever reason, like town doesn't actually own it or something like that, could-
Let's hope not that.
could we leave, well, I mean, the town owns, obviously, the fire station, but we don't know how far, at least I don't know how far back it goes.
Well, that's actually the GIS, that white line is the parcel area, based off of
Okay.
GIS. So that shows the amount of area that they own.
Okay, well, if for some reason, for some other reason.
Sure, it doesn't work.
Can we leave the window open that if this doesn't work, we would look for other town sites that may be adjacent to that wetland?
Versus using the Butterfield one?
Yes.
Sure, I guess one question would be, would even just further down in that parcel area?
Right.
I mean, right now, we've done it so that it has the easiest, I think, access up here, because it's closest to the parking lot.
No, and that looks
Um,
fine. I'm just,
But it could be in like the far corner or something near.
Yeah, I mean,
Cedar
we
right
could do
there.
something here,
Right there, too.
Yep.
Yeah,
if
well,
that,
if it's accessible.
off Cedar Street, it might.
it might be
more
off of
accessible.
Cedar.
yeah, that kind of southern corner,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, might be accessible off Cedar.
Well, it's a large complex. We have an old well site out there too, at some place that's, that we tried to find the day that we went to the Cedar Street site. We just went down the wrong path. But, it's town-owned, and, it's another option if we have to. I don't think that we're gonna have to go to another option.
The only concern I have is just timeframe.
Yeah.
With the approval of this tonight, we're gonna move forward with the survey and the flagging so that we can get this into you guys.
And if
as
the
soon as-
survey and the flagging works, then it should be
We're great.
go.
I think if it, for some reason, something came up and it doesn't, I don't know how much time we have to find another site and still get survey and revised plans into you, so
Okay.
I worry that, we're really,
All right, well, let's not
Missing a
muddy the
schedule.
water. Let's go with this.
I'll entertain a motion to close the hearing.
So moved.
Second. All right.
Got it, you got it.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you very much.
thank you very much.
Thanks for going back to that. Appreciate it.
No, thank you.
Order will be signed at the next meeting.
Okay. Do we need to show up for that meeting, or?
You do not,
Okay.
but you can if you want.
You'll just send us a copy of the order, can you just?
Draft?
Yeah.
Yes.
Could you keep the commission in the loop as to the results of the flagging?
As to the results of the what?
Of the flagging?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, yes.
I'll put it in as a condition of the order of conditions as well.
Yeah, that's.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else?
So, next on the item on the agenda is the 95-926 notice of intent and stormwater management permit for Eversource, Hopkinton to Ashland transfer line, gas line replacement from Hardwick Road to Cedar Street. I need to recuse myself from this hearing, so I will turn this over to Kathy. It's all yours.
Thank you. Okay, so I don't know if we need to go over the responses there. You want to do that first, Megan?
The comments?
The
Yeah.
comments, or
Do-
do we
do you
want to
wanna-
review at all?
It's been a while since we've
Yeah, that's what I was going
talked
to say. Do we
about
need to
this,
review?
and been a while since, so maybe they could do a summary a little bit
Yeah.
to start.
Can you? Great. That works.
Good evening. My name is Rick Paquette. I'm with SWCA Environmental Consultants. Here tonight on behalf of Eversource. I've got Matt Waldrop and Sean Berthume from Eversource Energy and Ken Stanley from Trimont Engineers, part of our project team for this project. So I basically take a few minutes to bring you up to speed from our perspective on the items that we have been working on since the last time we were in front of you folks. I figured the easiest way was just go through a PowerPoint that kind of touches on a higher level some of the primary issues, questions, comments that we've been attempting to address from both Megan and Matt Verrill, sorry, too many Matts. So with that, I will continue. So I just put in this slide here just to give you a little bit of a timeline. We had the last letter, we met, I believe, in August, and we had a letter from Megan on September 30th. We put together a response package, submitted that about a month later on October 30th. And then subsequent to that, we requested a review meeting, technical review meeting, to just discuss some of the more technical aspects of some of the comments. That was held on November 20th at the town hall, and then we had a follow-up kind of summary letter from the conservation agent on the 27th of November, and then we just recently submitted a response to that with some further clarification on December 7th, which is this past Friday. that's basically the timeline that we're under right now. So I'll bring you up to speed in terms of some of the items we've been working on with those 2 responses in the comments. I guess to kind of put it at a higher level, we've been working on addressing questions related to best management practices for construction procedures. We've been working on some additional information on existing resource conditions in the project area, working on responses addressing requests for additional details on restoration procedures following the installation, construction, inspection, and then also Megan communicated with the DCR and received comments from them on the work in Ashland State Park, and we included responses to those comments as well in the package. So those are kind of at a higher level, boiling it down to where those different issues have been addressed. So with that, I'll just start off with the construction BMP side of things and just touch on some of those issues. When we last met, there were many questions about how the construction was going to take place within some of the wetter wetlands, specifically the wetlands around Cold Spring Brook, and then the wetlands between West Union Street and Ashland State Park. There are 2 larger BVWs with associated floodplain areas there. So we went back and looked at some different BMP measures, and what we came up with was the use of reinforced silt fence, along with the continued proposal to mat the work area, but using this reinforced silt fence to form a more rigid structural edge, if you will, to the workspace that would be basically installed right at the edge of the mats, right at the edge of the workspace easement, to attempt to provide, the maximum amount of retainage of soil within the work area and on the mats. And then we also addressed some questions related to how those mats would be placed and the anchoring of those mats within the easement as well. And I thought it would be helpful. Last time we talked to the commission, there was a request for some photography to show some of these items, and so I have some photos for you to at least give you a sense of some of these particular BMPs. This photo that I'm showing you here is what this reinforced silt fence would look like. It's basically taking a taller silt fence and attaching it to a chain link fence at a low level, but giving it rigid reinforcement, and that would be laid in right along the right-of-way. And this particular photo is from a different project, but it was a installation of super silt fence along a pipeline right-of-way. And in this particular instance, it was used because this crossing it was in bog turtle wetland habitat. So it was important to provide a very definitive barrier to keep wildlife from moving in and out. So this photo just shows installation of that super silt fence along with some mat placement there. This is another photo just showing the laborers here actually putting the fencing in along the edge of the wetland workspace here. And finally, this is after the installation has occurred, and it's defining the uplands and the wetland areas along here. So they're just showing the BMP usage within this easement. In this case, this is a large, pretty wide pipeline easement. I put this photo in here just to show this is normal silt fence installation, but there were questions about whether this could be installed in wet areas, really wet areas, and in this case, this was going through a marsh habitat, and the silt fence was being installed through there, so that's why I put that one in there. Now, the other one of the other questions that came up from the previous hearings was the past construction, and Sean, the project engineer, was able to go back into the archives and dig out some very, these photos, 2002 timeframe, when the pipeline there was a beginning segment of the transfer line in Hopkinton that was installed as 12-inch. And that's this installation. So this actually shows you, it's in an upland area, but it does show you the installation of the actual transfer line in Hopkinton back in 2002, and showing the operation, the trench width, and the equipment along there. And both these photos show the same operation, just slightly different area. So I just want to touch again on the use of equipment mats. I know it's many questions about that. We consider it a standard BMP for constructing linear projects in easements to avoid rutting up wetlands, and from the equipment in providing a safe, stable platform for which the equipment can work from. There were questions from both Matt and Megan on the impacts of using mats in floodplains, and we responded to those in terms of mats serving as some type of impediment to surface flow during a flooding event. The mats themselves are they're not watertight structures. The water can move, through them, under them, around them. So we don't envision that as providing some type of damming effect in those floodplain areas. And then other questions came up, well, what would you do in the case of flooding? And it's typical to anchor mats, basically lashing them together to keep them tight, and then you can actually secure them to a tree if you think there's going to be some significant surface flooding that's going to occur from a storm event. This photo here, I just put this in here just to show you some mat placement. These stack mats in this area. Sometimes you can go with one row, but other times with contractors looking for a little additional stabilization, they'll stack mats up to provide an equipment crossing over a water body or wetland area. So that's what this represents here within there's an overhead power line easement here.
There's some sort of a concrete block, or what are you using there?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
I see some rectangular blocks underneath between the ground and that one.
Right here?
Yeah, what are those?
Those are cross matting, right? Yeah, it's cross matting, so it's just going the opposite direction.
Is this an example of working within a 20 to 30 foot easement?
No, not this. This is
Yeah.
this is the let me just go back.
These photos do.
This is the width of it was 20 feet in this section. 20 feet wide in this section of the transfer line that they were constructing within, right here. So this easement, I actually don't know the dimensions of this, but it's certainly wider than 20 feet.
Was that project for high tension lines, or was it for a gas line? Or are they both there?
This project, I believe this was a crossing for a pipeline through this area that they used to get across the wetland, and equipment crossing. And this one's a pipeline. This is another example. Again, it's a larger right-of-way. This is transmission line right-of-way where there's 2-3 pipes within the easement. So the easement width is actually in this case, is probably more like 75 feet wide. Could be up to 100 depending. But again, just showing how mats are built out across streams and wetlands, forming an equipment bridge to provide that support.
The fencing that you have, you're going to lay it down all through the project first and then do the job, or you're going to start fencing each section and do the work?
As far as the silt fencing, that would...
Whatever the other fencing also, because that's going to divide the land for habitats to move around from one side to the other side. So you're going to restrict them from moving. So if it's going to be a smaller section, it's okay, but it's a larger section, they cannot travel miles long to find out the path to go to the other side. So
Yeah, you are correct. In laying out silt fence, it can work as a barrier to wildlife, because basically something's going to come up to it. If there's no opening, it's going to go one way or the other. If it's really
correct, but whatever the lateral movement that they have should be minimized enough so that they can do their daily job, whatever they do, as best as they can, rather than traveling miles together on both sides.
Right, understood. In this case, you know, we haven't figured the exact, you know, linear feet of barrier that'll be placed at one time, but most of the wetland crossings are smaller. The bigger crossings, the goal would be to lay the fencing in there, and before the actual, you know, work started up. And then there are ways that you can leave gaps, but the one thing about that is you really don't want the animals in the resource area. I would rather them come up to the fence and move off, as opposed to trying to go in to the workspace and get into the trench or something like that. So in a sense.
I thought you were going to close the trench every night.
Yeah, well, that is the case.
Yeah,
We would be,
this is the time period when they go, because they're not gonna come during the daytime when
Right.
you're all working.
right,
So
no,
the night you're going to close the trench, so there's no chance them falling into it.
that's right, you are correct. The
So-
procedure would be to dig enough trench to be able to install
Can you manage to
backfill.
fence a smaller section and work through it and then start fencing as
Yeah.
you go along?
To answer your question,
Come closer to the mic.
sorry. To answer your question, we can limit the amount of fencing that is put up at one time, whether it is just the section of construction for that particular year, or we can cut it in half or quarter, something more manageable. And only do, you know, just as, we would stay enough ahead of our construction that we wouldn't be bogged down, but we could certainly cut it down in sections.
Hi, good evening. I'm Matt Waldrop with Eversource. I just wanted to add to Sean's comment. In the past, we have accepted conditions from commissions as well. It's really up to you as a board too. If you want to have a certain distance that you feel comfortable with, us putting the fence up and then stopping it to allow wildlife to get around, we'd certainly be open to that too. What we've tried to do in the past is strike a balance with, you know, putting the fencing in to make sure you do have a barrier for the work area and some type of sediment control, but also considering that there's wildlife that you don't want to block either. So it's a balancing act, and a lot of times it's just a judgment call made in the field and what the appropriate distance is depending on conditions. But if you as a board have, you know, a certain distance that you feel comfortable with, in the past we've been able to meet that. So it's something we're open to doing for sure.
Sure, that may be part of the conditions that we want to put it in.
Can be.
Thank you. These next two photos are just showing some more mat placement. This one is in an electrical transmission line right away, but again, just trying to provide an example of matting use in a flooded area such as this. And a little more extreme with this one was an open water mat crossing of an electric transmission line here to provide equipment access from one side to the other through here. And this was a stacked mat situation here. Yep. This is. So with that, I'll just move into another topic area that we've been working on. We've received comments from Matt and Megan on in the commission as well on the construction details, to provide additional details to the details as far as dimensions of equipment, to demonstrate that these are to scale, that they represent, you know, what a standard backhoe, a standard pickup truck would consist of. And so those details have been added to the permit package, and we've shown the widths of the various pieces of equipment within the easement that would be working on construction. So we've got the details for the 20-foot right-of-way, another one for the 30-foot wide easement as well, and an additional request that came from our technical review meeting was to provide a detail of a less than optimum configuration of the pipeline construction, in the sense that these other two details showed the pipeline centered up for the most part within the easement, with, you know, distribution of workspace relatively similar on both sides, whereas this one shows a situation where the actual pipe is closer to one edge than the other, and showing how that would be addressed from a construction standpoint. And that was done for both the 20 and the 30-foot construction work areas. We've also done the same thing with the illustrations as well, adding the dimensions to the vehicles from the last meeting and the equipment to the actual illustrations. And it's two different views that we had presented. And along the same lines, we've done the same thing with comments addressing the water body construction detail to show how the workspace would be laid out to cross streams, the way that a dam and pump operation would be set up in terms of the equipment, the dam location, the equipment bridge, and adding dimensions to that and getting that drawing to scale, which was a key comment that we had received. In addition, there's a number of other construction details that we addressed in narrative fashion as well as on the drawings, having to do with, and I'll just kind of tick through these, the amount of cover over the pipe within streams, distances to refueling, and adding notes to that effect to keep refueling operations out of resource areas, clarifying that excess soils won't be placed within resource areas, and then committing to having backup water pumps and generators on site or in nearby laydown areas in close proximity so that they can be easily accessed if mechanically a current generator or pump breaks down and they need to replace it quickly. So that's been added, and in terms of notes to the construction drawings.
Question here.
Sure.
You did mention about cleaning the mats as you go along so that you don't have to carry the debris from one place to the other place. So you're going to get water from outside, or you're going to use the local resource?
Did you want to address that one in terms of mat cleaning?
Would you mind repeating the question, KG,
But,
about
I mean,
mat cleaning?
You had indicated that you're going to clean up the matter as you move along with water.
Yes. Yep.
So that water, that source of water is from outside or from the same area?
Sure, so I assume you're referring to, like, before we take mats off-site and relocating them, how we would
Correct.
clean them?
Correct.
So there's actually different ways it can be done. One way is using water, some type of water source. Typically, we'll have a water truck on site for dust control, and sometimes we can repurpose that by washing mats before they leave the site or before they go into another wetland. Sometimes if the mats are permanently leaving the site and we're done with them, we won't wash them there because they're washed back at the mat yard, back at the contractor's yard. Another method we can use is compressed air. If there's some type of air on site, we can use that to blow any remaining seed or rootstock off the mats.
So that create more dust?
Not significant, unless it's a very dry day. You're not talking about kicking up, plumes of dust. It's maybe a small amount that's, limited to the area you're working in. And it doesn't travel very far, typically. The third way would be, and this is less common, this is only if we have room, if we're out in a rural area. Sometimes the crews will lift the mats up and drop them on the ground, and the vibration will shake off any remaining root or seed stock. So it would likely be either compressed air or washing. If the mats were being reused on site, if they were just going off site and we were done with them, we would take them off site and the contractors would wash them back in their matting yard.
Right, but this
Yep.
probably involves a lot of amount of water, and then I just want to make sure the water they use is good source rather than just contaminating the area from outside.
Sure.
So how do you make sure that it's clean water?
So that's a good question. I don't know where the water's sourced from on the water trucks. I can tell you it's certainly not contaminated. It would be from a clean source.
If you don't know the source, you wouldn't know about it.
It's clean water. I can tell, because we have our RFPs with our contractors, and our POs say that that water has to be clean. It depends on the contractor we use, where exactly they're taking it from. So I don't have that specific answer for you now where that water will come from.
That's to be mindful of it.
And we can tell you that once we know for sure, or if you have a place you'd rather us procure it from, we can. The one thing we stay away from is, unless we have authorization from the board to do it, is drawing down a wetland or a water source to use that water to wash off, sediment or seed. We can do that. I mean, it's possible, but in my experience, a lot of the boards want us to refrain from doing that because you're drawing down, you know, the water levels of a natural wetland or waterway. So, but it is an option if you prefer that, we could do that too.
If the law permits, I think that would be the best way to do it rather than
Okay.
contaminating from outside.
Okay, yeah, I mean, that's, we're open, is there any
We'd have
Not
to see.
permitted?
objections to that?
I don't know, we'd have to see whether that makes sense or not.
Look at the DEP regulations or EPA regulations that name it.
Yeah, I mean, typically, the state does not like us to do that. I know there's regulations for example, perennial streams
Mhm.
versus intermittent streams. Sometimes an applicant, it's written in the regs that the applicant can't draw down the stream to make it appear dry so they can take a photo and sell it off as an intermittent stream. So I know in general, the regulatory authorities tend to stay away from that, but you are the issuing authority in Ashland, and if you feel that's appropriate, we can do that too.
You can look into it later, I guess.
Thanks, Matt. So, a few other items that I'll just walk through. Again, responding to comments, one of the questions that came to us was, well, what are you gonna do if you've got a wetland matted up and the storm's coming, it's a big storm, with potential flooding, and so the contractor would be responsible for obviously monitoring the weather forecasts on a daily basis. If there was severe weather that was forecasted such that it would create some type of flooding conditions in those two floodplain areas, number of steps would be taken. The all backfilling would be done in terms of putting all the stockpiles back into the trench. All the mats would be fastened and checked for tightness, and then the construction equipment would be pulled out of the easement to a secure upland location. And that could all be done within one day, that whole kind of temporary demobilization of the site. So that's the plan for addressing any potential flooding events during construction. A few other items that were brought up for commentary, a request to identify areas of shallow groundwater where dewatering might be necessary, without having the ability to actually build out test pits. We looked at NRCS soil data to look at soil types that have shallow groundwater as part of their classifications. And based on that information, projected that into the easement, and about 48% of the project area is listed as having shallow groundwater. And obviously, to no surprise, most of that is within the wetlands that we cross. In that response, we provided maps showing where those specific soil types with shallow groundwater were located in the project area. We also refined the classification of two perennial streams that were conservatively labeled as perennial, but with the comments from Matt and Megan, we reviewed the stream stat data on that and reclassified two of them as intermittent because they didn't meet the half-acre watershed size as well. But the construction methodology from our standpoint is still the same for those stream crossings. We also conducted a tree survey within the easement.
I'm sorry, Mr. Paquette, could you back up to the previous one? Where are those streams?
One of them is located, it's where the exposed pipe is at the Brimstone, at the end of the cul-de-sac at Brimstone.
Okay.
And the other one it's a small drainage within the larger wetland east of Metropolitan. It's very narrow stream crossing within there.
Okay, how many stream crossings are there in Metropolitan? 2?
There is that one, and then the Cold Spring Brook, the actual major crossing there.
Okay.
This one is, if you're questioning the watershed size on this one, is that where your line of questioning is?
Well, we have, we've been involved in a lawsuit with regard to the requirement of the 0.5 acre and whether that's arbitrary or not. And so there are some streams that we know are perennial because they run all year, but under USGS, they're still called perennial.
Called intermittent.
What's that?
They're called
They're
intermittent.
called intermittent, and we think that they're perennial. So, but you said that the protection level is the same for these regardless?
From the standpoint of construction, yes, we're not going to implement any different measure just because it's labeled intermittent versus perennial.
Okay.
We're treating them the same. If there's water in the stream at the time of construction, we'll be conducting a dry crossing, with either a dam and pump or a flume methodology.
Okay, thank you.
So if I could just make one comment on that, just,
Go closer to the mic, I don't know.
And identify yourself.
yeah, Matt Varro from Lucas Environmental, peer reviewer for the commission. Just to kind of clarify that point, so Megan and I had talked about the fact that we had 4 perennial streams shown, and the concern being that if they weren't, and I understand your point about, whether the arbitrariness of the regulations and everything, but if they didn't meet the perennial standard per the regulations, should they be shown as perennial, just from the perspective of if there are other abutting properties that may have projects that you were sort of setting up to saying, okay, these streams are now perennial, when maybe they weren't per the regulations. We wanted to just have it, especially knowing where Eversource seemed indicated that, they were going to be basically treated as if they were perennial. When they're approached, if there's water in them, there's a certain operating procedure that happens. If they're dry, a different operating procedure. So we just wanted clarification that from a regulatory standpoint and for indicating what the impacts were in riverfront area, things like that, that we're really nailing it down to what it is per the regulations, and not just sort of saying, well, we'll call a perennial stream to be nice, where from a project standpoint, it didn't seem like it was going to make much difference. So that was why we brought that up and asked for that clarification.
Thank you.
Okay, but you also mentioned you noticed water flowing through it all year round?
That's
with
right.
These 2 streams?
Yeah. Well, we've noticed, it's always been flowing whenever we've done site visits various times of the year, so. So, we also had conducted a tree survey. This was done throughout the easement, not just within wetland areas, but in response to a request for some additional information on vegetation within the easement. We provided this data, and then in the initial response back in October, on October 30th, and then Matt and Megan wanted some additional refinement of that to identify which trees are in resource areas and the buffer zones and in the no disturbance zone versus trees that are outside of that. So we went ahead and added some additional columns to that data table to basically identify which ones are in and out of wetland resource area. Excuse me, wetland resource areas.
Sorry to be
I just provide a little bit of clarification on that too. We had asked for sort of that extra column on saying, is it in resource areas or not, within your jurisdiction or not, thinking that, so the commission could know better quantification on what the impacts are within the jurisdiction. So if you were thinking of any requirements for mitigation of some sort for the loss of those trees, you'd have some real numbers to go by in thinking about what mitigation might be if you felt that was necessary.
Thank you. Just to go back to you don't have to physically go back there, but so that I have this straight and everyone else has it straight, maybe I'm the only one that's a little confused. The streams were designated as perennial by USGS? And is that?
Then go ahead.
You guys applied stream stats and determined that they were intermittent?
No.
No.
So Rick, do you want to address that?
So the field biologists originally identified them as perennial when they delineated the wetlands. And then we did, with the additional comments that we received, we went through the stream stats analysis based on the riverfront area regulation in terms of the half acre and the stratified drift and all that stuff there. And coming out the other end, those 2 streams do not meet the perennial classification based on that particular regulation.
Okay, so
And they're
we're-
not blue, they're not, I'll just add too, they're not blue line perennials as far as like if you pulled a topo map and looked at a topo map to see if it was a perennial stream, they don't show up as that either.
Okay, so if you go back to that slide, it didn't have USGS in there. Okay, got you.
So there's a table that we put together in the response packet that it covers every stream and then identifies, it goes through the stream stats data, the relevant data for the stream stats as tying it back to the regulation. And then we had included the.
And they were determined to be perennial initially just because they had running water in them? Or?
That was the determination from the biologists.
Okay.
Yep. Based on the characteristics that they saw, they felt that they were perennial flow.
Okay,
So
I've got it now.
Yeah,
Thanks.
so, and just one final clarification, so Rick, there's really it's only Cold Spring Brook that shows as a perennial stream on the USGS map.
That's right.
Nothing else is shown essentially,
And the
right?
tributary to Cold Spring Brook is also identified.
What
as
about the one,
perennial.
the Cliffs Creek or whatever it was?
There's two.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but
Well, that one, even regardless of, my understanding, that one doesn't show as perennial on the topo map, but it does come out as perennial with the stream stats because
Okay.
the watershed size, it meets the criteria.
right, so I think maybe just for the public's understanding of it, so the way that the regulations are written, the standard is, the first thing you look at is the USGS map. And the USGS map identifies some streams as perennial, some streams as intermittent, and it doesn't show some streams at all, which are considered intermittent. So the first sort of cut on that is if it's shown as perennial, it's considered perennial and has riverfront area, unless you overcome that with observations of it being dry for at least 4 days within a given year. So if it's intermittent, then you apply this stream stats procedure to determine if it has a certain watershed size and a certain flow rate, then it can become perennial. But you can't take a perennial stream, apply stream stats, and make it intermittent. So just to try and clarify
Okay.
that, or if I did, hopefully I didn't confuse people more.
Well, you may have, but the bottom line is intermittent and perennial have different levels of protection.
Correct.
And
A perennial
perennial is
stream has a
protected more.
200-foot riverfront area around it.
Okay, that's the
either
one
side.
distinction.
Yeah.
Okay, we're finally clear on that one, thanks.
Thanks, Matt. So, I'll try to move this along for you guys. The stream bank restoration topic was another point of emphasis in the comments that we received. So we provided additional information in terms of other BMPs to restore stream banks, live stakes, core logs to stabilize the banks following construction. We provided additional narrative discussions related to the process for the stream crossings. And then we provided some additional plan details to show the dimensions and the scale. And I actually showed you that one before for like a typical crossing. And again, just I put this is another pipeline project where they crossed a stream and they had restored the area along the bank using a combination of the BMPs that we discussed. And just want to give you a little bit of an idea of what that might look like. Another topic had to deal with the restoration seed mixes. Matt Verrill had recommended the use of a nurse seed mix to get quick stabilization in the soils. A fast-growing annual rye is what we propose to use in combination with the traditional wet mix, the wetland seed mix that would be used to restore the disturbed soils. So the annual rye would get that soil locked down while the other seed takes a little bit longer to get going. We also provided an invasive species management plan, and then we submitted that back in October, and then we updated it more recently last week to address some additional comments from Matt and Megan, and so that plan basically involves a survey that we did in July of 2019, We walked the easement and identified areas of invasive populations, plant species populations, all throughout the right-of-way in the resource areas. Generated maps and tables from that with the data. We identified 30 population areas, and the plan laid out the monitoring and the management that procedures that we would follow. These are the most common species, no surprise in terms of they're very, very common in the area with bittersweet, multiflora rose, the shrub honeysuckles, and barberry buckthorns, pretty prevalent out there. A little bit of loosestrife, common reed in some areas, and then some reed canary grass. And the goal for the invasives plan would be to control the spread, basically keep it in check, make sure it's not spreading into areas where it wasn't before within the easement. So that's the overarching goal of that. There would be post-construction monitoring to basically, ensure that that's not occurring. And if it is occurring, we have management measures in place. The first line of defense, if you will, would be to do mechanical methods, hopefully get out there quick and be able to pull, hand pulling, digging, cutting, that kind of thing. If that didn't prove effective, then chemical measures would be considered to try to eradicate the invasives as well. But that would only be done on a site-specific basis. So the last slide I have, collective sigh of relief, I'm sure, but the slide I have is just kind of giving you a little bit of an idea where things stand with some of the other agencies that we've been dealing with. DCR has provided comments, review comments. We had responded to those back in October, and I think Nat Tipton at DCR had come back with some follow-up on our comments or responses.
That's correct.
Did you want to say anything?
Nope, I just
Okay.
wanted to let everybody know that is correct. Nathan Tipton is with the state through the Department of Conservation and Recreation that oversees these kinds of projects going into DCR lands. Those comments were forwarded back to Eversource, and where it stands right now, I'm not sure. I haven't had a chance to look at it, but I know that I sent it to you.
Okay. Satisfied with everything?
Yeah, I recall that I think he was satisfied with the answers that we had provided. I did want to mention too, one of the comments was the Article 97 status for the easement within the state park, and that continues to occur in the background, and with a draft bill being submitted, I believe, in January of this year, with a legislative vote scheduled in July of 2020. And that process would continue on. It's not, DCR has indicated that could work its way through the system concurrently with the project moving ahead with construction. The Mass DEP had just issued their 401 certificate. Technically it was November, so that came out. And the Energy Facility Siting Board, we anticipate a decision first quarter 2020, but that's about all the update. We haven't really have any other updates for that as well.
And we received a hard copy in the mail. Did the commission get a copy of that? I don't know if I forwarded it to you or not, of the 401 water quality cert issued by DEP. Okay, I'll make note to forward to everybody.
What about the DCR things? Did you send that to us too?
No, I don't think I did. The responses came in late last week.
Okay, so we need that too.
Through the chair, I was just going to piggyback off of what Mr. Paquette was referring to and what Megan was referring to from Nat Tipton at DCR. He does say in his response that our responses were acceptable. He did have one question on the timeline that we would be crossing the Ashland State Park wetland. There was a discrepancy of 2022 versus 2023. We originally had planned for 2022, but given the siting and permitting process has taken a little longer than we had expected, it's going to be 2023 now. So we will specify that correction, but other than that, he did not have any other comments on the information we had provided
I don't think we have any correspondence on any of that stuff,
No,
so
that's
we
what
don't know
she
what you're
said.
responding to, actually.
Sure, I would just go through Megan on that, because
Right, and that's
believe
what
she
she's gonna
said,
send
yeah.
us that.
Yep.
So we don't have the DCR thing or the Mass DEP quality.
yeah, and this was
So
what
we
you
need to
had
get
forwarded me,
those.
Megan. What I just read was the stuff you had forwarded.
Absolutely. It was checking something.
Isn't there
real
a-
quick.
A court case pending on the 2-pipe, 1-pipe decision, is that done?
That's.
So you do have it in
so-
front of you tonight, Nathan Tipton's response back. It's comment number 27 in the comment filing review sheet that's dated December 5th of 2019, issued by me. Copies of that were also given to Matt Waldrop, Matt Verrill, and Rick this evening.
Oh,
That was comment number 27.
Okay.
So you have it in front of you as a paper copy right now. I just need to send it to you, an electronic copy. The water quality cert was sent to me as a mailing. I don't have it as an electronic copy, but I do have it in scanned. I made note to forward that to you tomorrow, as well as to include Matt Verrill on that correspondence in addition to sending it to you.
Okay. That's good, yeah. So we need to look at that. Because this is the first time we would have seen it here, right?
Correct.
Okay. Okay, all right, next, comments from the, questions, comments from the Conservation Commission?
Mr. Paquette, do you have on your computer some kind of a Google Earth thing of this project?
A group alert?
Some kind of an aerial Google Earth thing?
Oh, Google Earth.
So that we can refer to?
If, is there any particular area I can pull up? Google?
I was gonna say, does the computer have internet on it?
This is not my computer. This is the town's computer.
It should be connected to the internet.
Well, the area that most impacts our purview is the area between kind of 135 and Chestnut Street. I believe you call them areas 4, 5, and 6. While you're looking, just if this is your first time either watching these hearings or listening to these hearings or being here, the Conservation Commission, and some of you are probably tired of us saying this, our purview is solely wetland purview. The Siting Board and the Land Court are dealing with two other issues that are not before the Conservation Commission. We are only charged with commenting on how this impacts the wetlands.
Do you want to ask some of your questions?
Well, I'd really like to have something
Okay.
to refer to. If you can't find it, I guess we'll just have to go without it, but it would be helpful if we had some kind of reference.
Yeah, I've got it on my computer, but this is not my computer. This, I wasn't able to plug mine in, so, just give me a second, I'll try to pull something up.
Okay, thank you.
Oh,
That's all right,
Anybody else want to talk about that, or you have any,
Yeah, I'll wait, I have some questions.
you want to wait until it gets up? Okay.
Well, if we have some kind of, frame of reference as to what we're talking about,
That's fine.
it would
we lost our screen.
be helpful. If we can't get it, then we can't get it.
I have a potential time filler comment that
Go right ahead.
Mr. Waldrop might be able to respond to.
Please, go ahead.
Fairly minor, just on the invasive species control plan, the most recent version. There's a few places where I'm looking in section 3.3, the post-construction management, where it says if it's been determined through monitoring that invasive species have spread within the resource areas and into areas not previously colonized, the company will quote, evaluate potential management measures, and that's sort of, the term just evaluate comes up a few times. and I think this potentially could be covered with a special condition, but I think the preference would be to say that something's gonna be implemented to deal with the issue rather than just evaluate it. You know, and that probably could go into deeper in that as far as whether the commission would wanna see Eversource come back before the board with what their plan is before it's actually implemented, or if you just want them to move forward with it. One other comment on that plan as well. The last comment is about sort of the timing of things, and it says post-construction invasive species control procedures will occur in late summer to early fall of the monitoring years. And the plan includes information from NRCS about each specific invasive species. And depending on the species, some species need to be treated at different times of year, not necessarily late summer or early fall. So I think it should be more that any treatment measures should be done as per recommended by the scientific literature.
No, I think we need to keep going.
Is that,
Yeah, I'm just waiting to get it back up on the screen. I have a map,
oh, you did find something?
I've got an aerial that shows both those areas if that'll work for
Oh.
you. I'm just waiting for it to.
This gentleman, I think, is gonna see if he can fix it.
Yeah, hopefully the PowerPoint won't have reset it.
Megan, should we go through the comments themselves or something, or keep going this way?
We can go through the comments, however, the comments aren't based off of their recent revisions. I haven't had a chance to look at those.
Okay, then those.
So I don't know what you wanna do with those.
Let me just see if I can get the projector on now, because that should get
Let's
it.
deal with our questions then.
Does this have internet access?
Yes, I believe it should.
Okay.
Something.
Well, why don't I start?
Yeah.
And hopefully we'll get something up there. First of all, I wanted to thank all of you guys for bringing these visuals. I think it's helpful it's something that we've been complaining about for the last few times, so it's helpful to have some visuals of what's,
There you go.
of what's going on. Okay.
So that's West Union.
That's West Union Street, so.
Yeah. So this is the green is the
and so,
corral.
and then it's going that way towards the state park.
That's right.
Can you move that at all, so it,
So that's the other, it highlights the wetland crossing, so there is a gap in
okay,
between.
and that's, Metropolitan Avenue on the left?
Yep.
And that's the spillway there.
Yeah, okay.
Right,
All
this
right,
is
all right,
Metropolitan.
well, hold it right there. So thank you very much. My concern with a lot of stuff, and I have some questions here, they all kind of come back to the same thing, and it has to do with the easement, the size of the easement. The easement in the state park is all 30 feet, correct? The easement on private property is 20 feet. So most of this wetland complex is in state park. My first question, I guess, is could you, and I know that you've done this before, but I was not clear on it, and I think probably a lot of people weren't clear on it. You're passing, and I don't have a laser, but can you point out where the spillway is with yours? Yeah, and where you're crossing is right where the spillway enters into the Cold Spring Brook coming out of the back of the dike, right there, yeah. And you're going underneath that. And that spillway's running. And so could you, as brief as you can do it, and it's a complicated process, explain how you're going to dewater Cold Spring Brook and pass that water around, and how you would be able to do that in a 30-foot easement. Do you understand the question?
I do understand the question, and so the industry, the typical practice that's used when they call it dry crossing, it's not dry crossing, but it's to isolate the work area to remove the flow out of the work area so you can work, quote, in the dry. That can be achieved basically with two methods. One is the dam and pump, where you would construct dams on either side of your work area, temporary dams. A lot of times they can be done with just polyplastic and sandbags to form a barrier on the upstream and downstream sides. And then you would station pump or pumps depending on the flow. They have to be gauged properly. The contractor would be responsible for getting the right size pumps for the flow. And then the water would be pumped from the upstream side of that dam and then through a hose and back around to the other side of the dam. So the flow would be continued around the work area without it actually going through the work area, and allow for the trenching in the stream, the installation of the pipe, the backfill of the trench and the banks, and the restoration of that area before. And when that's all set, then the dams would be removed from the stream, and water would be allowed to restore or reflow. The other option is a flume, where the water is basically piped temporarily across the easement instead of being pumped. And those flume pipes would be installed, water would be put in them, and then you'd work underneath them. So in a sense, you'd have two pipes, and underneath the pipes would be the trench and the pipeline installation for the transfer line. And again, the same principle applies, that you're trying to avoid working in flowing water with these two methods.
And would those methods be determined by the contractor that you hire, or are those methods that you can determine ahead of time?
Yeah, the two you mean whether or not he's gonna, the contractor would flume it or dam and pump?
Correct.
We give the option of either to the contractor to get the best fit for the location, but both are effective. And it would ultimately be the responsibility, or would you define it in the contract, or would you leave it up to them?
How would you? Well, can I finish my question?
Yeah, sorry.
Once you dam it on, I guess this would be the west side of the pipeline, what keeps it from, because there's significant flow oftentimes coming down that spillway.
Mm-hmm.
You would have to have the same amount of flow going out, being pumped out.
That's right. You would have to match it.
And would that go under the mats or over the mats, or it has to go past the mats somehow?
Are you talking about the actual, the hose pumped water?
Right.
Yeah, normally they wrap them around up, not, or they can go over, but normally they'll go around across the easement and then to the other side, where they'll discharge.
Okay, and you can, and all this can happen in a 30-foot easement?
Yes, that is correct.
Does the 30-foot easement, so if for some reason you dam that and it floods, you're out of the 30-foot easement, correct? Flooding includes workspace, I'm assuming?
Can you rephrase that? What do you mean?
Yeah, well, because you're working in a 30-foot easement. If you dam the area towards the reservoir,
Right.
and for some reason, the amount of water that you're pumping out into what I guess is the east side of Cold Spring Brook is not equal to the amount of water that's coming down, it's gonna flood that area.
Right, if you don't have sufficient pumps, then yeah, it's gonna back up.
And is that something that's gonna have to be monitored 24 hours a day, or what? I mean, what happens if those pumps turn off in the middle of the night?
Yeah, I mean, that's where it comes down to monitoring, the weather forecasts, and making sure that the crossing timing works the best. In other words, if you're not going to try to implement this crossing if there's going to be some flooding events or storm events coming in, that makes no sense to do it that way. So there is going to be some flexibility in trying to select the right time to do it. I mean, obviously, it's much easier to do this when there's low flow, for sure, as opposed to high water events. And the timing of this, Sean, I mean, I think it's towards the end, trying to get this at the end of the summer, when you try to take advantage of the lowest flow conditions that you could get through the years, through the seasons.
Did you want to add something?
How long will the dam stay there in that shape?
What do you think?
It would only be there during actual construction through the stream.
Like a number of days? 10, 15, 20, 3 months?
I would say, obviously depending on conditions that we found during excavation, but I would rough estimate as long as a month, but maybe 2 weeks to a month, something along those lines.
So if the fishes are larger than the pipe size, they won't be able to cross across. They won't be able to move because your pipe doesn't accommodate them. If it's longer time, then it's a problem, isn't it?
Yeah,
And
Ken
your
Stanley
name?
at Trimont Engineering. So we did supply with the plan set, the construction methodology to show both the dam and pump and the flume crossing. And we also provided that in a scaled event, so you can see how it would fit in that 30-foot workspace. But when you're constructing these things, and actually, our mission is to get in and out of there as quick as possible. So if we choose a time in which it's most dry, the least amount of flow, we're gonna get in there, put the pipe in the ground, get as much pipe connected to it on either end so we can remove that. The mission is to get it out of there as soon as possible so that it's not necessarily in there for any other reason other than for installing the pipe. So once the pipe's in, we can then remove and passes a test, does the x-ray and so on. Once the pipe is buried, we'd be able to take that out,
So
once we're comfortable with it.
pipe is better than the pump then?
Oh, and the methodology, depending upon the actual flow of the river.
No,
or-
with regards to the fishes, if they want to cross.
Absolutely, absolutely. So it would be a much better situation for wildlife to get through a flume pipe than obviously any pumping situation.
Have you been to the site, sir?
Yes, I have.
You have, and you think that all of this can happen in a 30-foot easement?
We spent a lot of time there, so understanding what the conditions were, how far out, it really got wet, and how long the water actually stood there. So from a construction perspective, we felt confident in the sense that the time I went through there was both when it was very wet, but when it was very dry. So I think strategically, it makes most sense to monitor what's happening in the weeks ahead, so we can understand weather conditions and so on, so that we can time that construction installation to be in and out of there as quick as possible.
If your pipes are big enough to take the amount of inflow and then put them out like what it's currently doing it's better than having a pump, because pump could fail in the night. So you don't have to monitor these things if you have pipes on.
Correct. And in some cases, where you have very little water, sometimes the pump is better because they have a larger, I guess from a water flow perspective, the flume is a better option.
Right, but if you put the pump there, unforeseen circumstances may lead to a situation where it may happen what Carl is suggesting. So it's better to be safer to use the pipes than.
It would be more
pumps.
conservative to use a pump.
And the blocked cross-section of the pipe is very minimal compared to the opening. So you can probably adjust the pipe enough to take care of the intake of
That's
what you
correct.
come and then exit out of the pipes.
That's correct.
If I could ask a question on that, what's the largest pipe size that you could use for a flume setup? I'm presuming there's some upper limit.
We would have to match the flow. We haven't done a flow study per se for that particular crossing to say what size it would be. But we've used as large as 24-inch flume pipe, and then as small as whatever would be required to move a smaller flow.
So do you think a 24-inch would be sufficient to carry the flow through there, or is that hard to say without?
It depends on how much water is flowing at the time that we're installing.
You're not talking about one pipe, it could be multiple pipes.
It would behoove us to choose a time to construct that would not require multiple flumes.
But you may be limited to your construction plan by weather. I mean, it's a long pipeline, so the fact, you know, you don't know when you're gonna land at Cold Spring Brook.
Correct.
It's not like, it looks like it's gonna be a nice day tomorrow, we'll go out to Cold Spring Brook. You know.
There have been projects that we've worked on where we've chosen what to cross when at certain times.
Well, you could to a certain degree, except that you've gotta get to this area,
Understood.
which is not
Understood.
particularly easy. So let me just run through, because all my questions are kind of related to this 20 to 30 foot easement. Thank you for your explanation on that. You mentioned earlier, Ms. Paquette, I think in your presentation, we asked for you to identify the refueling stations, and we didn't get an answer, and I'm not sure why we didn't get an answer. Is that because you would not know that until you hired a contractor? But let me combine this with another one, so I'm not the only one talking all night. In this area, so this is, if you go further this way, you're at Chestnut Street. Can you move it again that way? And where is 130, that's not it, is it?
It jumps to the next, yeah, so it's not total coverage of the easement, it's only focusing on the
Okay, can you
wetland
go
areas.
back to the first, wherever it was, where you said?
First one.
No.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go
This
on.
one.
Yeah, okay. So
Sorry.
you're going from, if you, do you still have your pointer?
Yeah.
You can point where 135 is, and then you're going all along that area, and then you're going all the way to Chestnut Street, which is probably a mile. And the only thing in between, now if you go back to the other slide that has Metropolitan Avenue in it, the only thing between Chestnut Street and 135 is Metropolitan Avenue, and you're in a 30-foot easement. And on Metropolitan Avenue is like a cart road, and you can't be on private property, and you can't be on the road. So where would the staging operations be for all of this, from that area all the way to that area, including refueling? Because it seems to me that there needs to be some kind of a major staging area that's relatively close to what's going on in order to coordinate what you're talking about. And I'm not just asking you, I'm asking anyone in your group. Have they been identified? So it would be a staging area for construction and a staging area for refueling, maybe, if you're not gonna refuel in the field.
So at this time, we haven't identified specific locations other than we've committed to, that we would not refuel in a jurisdictional area. We will have a laydown area somewhere outside of the immediate project construction zone as a laydown area where material, piping, soil, where rocks that are removed from the site will be brought. We don't know exactly where that's going to be at this time, but we will have a site somewhere, whether it's in Ashland or Hopkinton, there will be another site nearby.
So you will monitor your equipment so that you will have enough fuel to get it out?
And get to the refueling site,
illegal,
yeah.
Is that a question?
Of course.
Okay.
Hmm? Yeah.
So I guess the answer to your question is outside of not being in the jurisdictional wetland, we have not identified specific locations along the easement, other than that they would be in upland areas where we would refuel.
Right, but if the outside area is far enough, then you need to have to monitor each equipment to make sure you have enough fuel to take it out, or you must have a means to take it out.
Yes.
Yes, yeah, we would just have to monitor the equipment to make sure that we, can go in and make sure we're looking at the gauges to get out and refuel in a non-jurisdictional area. Now that, a lot of times we'll use stationary equipment. I don't believe we're using any drill rigs or anything of that nature on this project, but the only time we push back on that is if we do have a rig that's stationary, that can't move, then we would have to refuel, but if we were refueling, we would utilize containment, some type of secondary containment, which is essentially like a bathtub plastic liner we put underneath in case there's any drips, that it would be contained and not be released to the mats or to the environment. And that's just drips, not gallons.
So what kind of safety you will have for the equipment which brings the fuel to that place? Some accident happens and spills on the thing from the equipment which is carrying the fuel from outside to the land site.
Sure, that's a good question. So typically, that equipment is inspected prior to coming on site anyway, because they're traveling on the roadway, and you don't want to have any type of release anywhere when you have some type of fuel truck or something of that nature coming, to a site. A lot of them are double-lined containers anyway, but all of these trucks have spill kits and containment anyway. So say, and this is hypothetical, I've never had this happen on a project, but say if they were coming out on mats to deliver us fuel, if a truck had run out of fuel, or if we had a stationary rig that couldn't move, and there was something that someone observed, like a leak or a release, they would stop immediately and have to deploy the spill kit and containment and it would be stalled until that was fixed. And that's when our emergency response protocol would kick in. Now, as I said, that's never happened on a project that I've worked on, any type of catastrophic release, but because you asked, that's the protocol we would take. Does that answer your question?
Somewhat.
What
We have to
part?
wait until see what happens, because we know that recently there was some issue on one of those streets here where N-Star had a motor running there.
KG, when you speak.
N-Star had a motor there that overnight it flooded from their system out onto the tub and outside, so things happen. So we have to
Okay.
be watchful of it.
Carl, I think you have one more.
Yeah, I have one more question. Again, a collective sigh of relief, but it's a long question. So, I spent the weekend reading all of this stuff in front of me again, because I've had some of it for some time. And what most people are not aware of is that you had 6 routes that you considered. We've only talked about 2 here, the preferred route and the noticed alternative, but there were actually 6, is that correct, or 5 or 6?
I wouldn't characterize them as 6 different routes. I would characterize them more as like hybrid routes. They're more or less the same route, but they may have different connecting pieces.
Exactly.
Yep.
So there was the cross-street route, which,
Yes.
the one that you're talking about just stayed in the current easement. The other ones went into streets on part of the route and out of the easement and then back into the easement. And
That's correct.
cross street, one was in Franklin Road, one went down to 135 and then down to that area of 135 and then back into the easement. One came out at Prospect Street and didn't cross Prospect, but went down Prospect, down Fruit, and down Elliott. And all of them were weighted with a number of different considerations, including wetland resource tree clearing, public shade trees, but a lot of the things were traffic congestion, public transportation, residential land use, noise pollution, and they were all weighted. A lot of what was measured was the inconvenience on folks and neighborhoods, and I appreciate that, but that's not what's before us. Of all of those routes, they all, except for the noticed alternative, went through this impact area 4, 5, and 6. They either went into the street and then back into this. Well, that's what they all did. They all went back into the street or back into this, with the exception of the noticed alternative, which stayed in the street the entire route. Am I right so far?
So there's a lot of information you just gave, but I believe it sounds correct.
Well, believe that there were
yes.
6 semi-routes, we'll
Yes,
call them.
what you said, Mr. Haggerson, sounds correct. The preferred route is the only one that's entirely within the easement, and I believe our noticed alternative is entirely within the road.
The road.
And the other pieces are kind of a mixture of both to
Yes.
mix and match. So what
Okay,
you said
thank
is
you.
correct. Yep,
And they were all scored
that's correct.
one way or another.
Yes.
And as one might imagine, the impact on noise, pollution, and traffic and things like that were the lowest on the preferred route, which runs through the woods. So it's not going to be impacting people. It's not going to be going past churches. It's not going to be going past schools. It's not going to be going past funeral homes. It's not going. It's in the woods. But it was that route that scored the highest of impact on environmental and wetlands issues, as one might imagine. So what is before us? I know that you are applying for a waiver of our local bylaw in the 25-foot no disturb zone, which I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it says the applicant shall provide information and evidence deemed satisfactory by the commission that the work be performed sufficiently and protects and enhances wetland interests. It also speaks of, which is why I read the whole thing, about practicable alternatives. I guess my question is, why is that less important to Eversource? Is it simply because my analysis, and this is just my analysis, was that what it really came down to is it was more expensive to put it in the road all the way through. Because the impact on the environmental issues is, I won't say that it's minimal, but it's much more minimal than this plan is. So was there ever any serious consideration of putting this pipeline somewhere else other than through that wetland complex?
Absolutely. I mean, we looked hard at these alternative routes, and the siting board did, and we were vetted hard through the MEPA process as well. Mass DEP did it as part of the 401, had us do an alternatives analysis. I would respectfully object to the use of the term, why does this matter less to Eversource? It's not that it matters less, it's just that we have to assign scoring and weighting for each of these categories. And again, a lot of this, we're willing to discuss it tonight, but a lot of this happens at the siting board, so we're limited to what we are supposed to be discussing with the commission, but I'll discuss it anyway. The reason the siting board assesses both the human and environmental impacts.
Mm-hmm.
As you mentioned, this route is the most impactful from a wetland standpoint, but in terms of sensitive receptors, proximity to daycares, schools, traffic, the other route is far worse than this route because, to your point, it's in the woods. What was a big piece of it is a lot of the wetland impacts that we have historically, and we can agree to disagree on this, but they are temporary impacts, meaning that there's no permanent alteration to the landscape other than some maintenance clearing we might be doing on the edge of the right-of-way. And we have more control over that, but we have no way of really knowing with any absolute certainty how much traffic we're going to impact. A lot of that depends on conditions that are outside of our control. And we have the scoring that we developed, that EFSB approved, that we assigned values to all of these different categories that you just referred to, and the preferred route was the one that came out to be the preferred option. And I'm not sure what the costs are, but cost is something that the siting board considers because it's in our interest to keep the rates down, and we're a rate-based company. But considering the environmental criteria, the cost, and reliability, with all those things weighted in our petition and by the siting board and by MEPA, that's why this route has come out as the preferred route for now. I know the siting board process isn't done, but that's the case that we've made, and we feel strongly that this really is the best route overall. And to your point about your bylaw, I mean, under the state act, I'll start there. There's two different pieces here. There's your bylaw and the state act, obviously. So the state act, we have the limited project provision, which we wouldn't be able to do this project without that, which, means there's a limited number of projects that don't have as strict an adherence to performance standards, things like pipelines, electric lines, airports, projects that couldn't be built because we wouldn't be able to build them with the thresholds that DEP has allowed us within 5,000 square feet of wetland impacts. That's why that provision exists. And that also is why it says, if we weren't before the siting board, you would be within your authority to, you still are, but you would be more within your authority to deny this route and make us go to the road. But because this is before the siting board, in a project of this size, the siting board has to consider things that are outside of your jurisdiction other than wetlands, things like I mentioned sensitive receptors, schools,
No, I
traffic.
understand that,
But
but-
your bylaw, that doesn't apply to your bylaw, and I think I know where you're going with this. Now, if you chose to deny this under your bylaw, we would have to get an override from EFSB, and that would apply to your bylaw as well. So
I'm not suggesting anything other than the fact that you have redirected me several times to stay on point with what we have purview over. And what we have purview over is simply wetlands. We don't have purview over noise. We don't have purview over churches and schools. We don't have purview over neighborhoods. And they're all important. But what's before us is the impact on the wetlands. And so that's what we're simply considering. And it's just, it's, this is, obviously, it's the largest project that's come before this commission since I've been on the commission. And to take it lightly, I think would be a disservice to the people that we represent. So that's why we're trying to do a thorough job here. And that's why some towns have local bylaws, because state laws failed them. And our local bylaw is clear that we can waive this in certain circumstances, but I read you the clause that I think is relevant. That doesn't mean that, doesn't mean anything other than what I just said. And I understand that you would, if for some reason it were to be denied under the bylaw, that you would appeal that to, my knowledge, you could appeal it one of two places, but you would probably choose to appeal it to the siting board.
I'd say that's correct, yes.
A question here. You said about the
Thank you.
impact for the environmental is temporary, but I don't expect you to be sitting on the road for ages perennially. It'll be probably finished temporary anyway, right? Even here? Impact on the roads?
Correct. I guess what I meant to say was it's more mitigatable, meaning that the wetlands aren't going anywhere other than dealing with things like fluctuating water tables and time of year. There's no external forces that's going to impact construction like traffic or, school buses, school comings and goings, things of that nature. So it's more mitigatable, which is,
They're all temporary. We all want to have the protection for the wetland areas, and we need to suffer a little bit. We will probably suffer.
right. So,
So which is, we need to weigh on what we want to do, because we are willing to probably allow you to do the things on the roads and then suffer the consequence of little bit traffic. Then why not take that option?
So I understand, and I know it's not just because it's expensive, and we talk around in circles with this all the time. The bottom line is that this route came out as the best route through the scoring. And
I don't buy the expensive issue, because your cost comes from charging the people. You're going to put the money anyway, one day or the other. It's going to be spread over 10 years or 5 years. It's going to be coming from us.
Sure.
So your cost management is not an issue here, because you're going to charge us somehow, because they're not going to print the money in your bank.
So, Madam
Somebody
Chair,
has to pay.
I'd respectfully request that we bring this back to the wetlands. I mean, I'm not comfortable to discuss costs here. This is all happening at the siting board. And just so the public is aware, we're not supposed to duplicate the legal proceeding that's happening at the siting board here with the Concom. It's supposed to be just wetlands. And I understand what Mr. Hackinson is saying, but, I'm pushing it already, discussing a lot of this here. And I'm just gonna read the clause that I referred to before. So if this was not before the siting board, you would have the authority the other route does have less wetland impacts. It said, this is from the regulations, it says the issuing authority may require a reasonable alternative route with fewer adverse effects for a local distribution or connecting line, which is what the alternative route is. not reviewed by the Energy Facilities Siting Council. So with the idea that this is before the siting board means that there's other effects here at play other than the wetlands. And that's not to belittle the Conservation Commission's jurisdiction. It's just if this was based on solely wetlands, it would be unfair to other folks that are affected by this project on the street, to the schools, hospitals.
But you're reading
noise,
from
traffic.
the state law, correct?
Correct, and that's why, Mr. Hackinson, earlier I said this is different than your bylaw. And it's not my place to tell you how you interpret your bylaw, but.
And we protect the
so-
wetlands.
Okay,
Correct.
thank you.
Yes.
Did you have any?
Sure, yeah, I can kind of move the discussion more towards mitigation and the invasive plant species control plan that you've put forth. So this, I saw this for the first time last meeting in October, and this is sort of, from our last meeting, this is where we left off, in my opinion, back in August. We began to kind of talk about mitigation and restoration, and then shortly thereafter, your team had met with Megan and Mr. Verrill, and you had spoke a little bit more in depth, provided a little more granularity on that. And so basically, what I'm asking questions about is, so you've proposed putting down a certain seed mix, the New England wetland seed mix, and I had looked that up, and apparently it's composed of 16 varieties, and it's kind of heavy with sedges and rushes. And when I went down and kind of investigated all the growth requirements for these plants, most of them required full sun. And when I look at this route, I can see it being in full sun for a couple years once you take out your 50 trees, but then it's going to shade again. And I'm just concerned about the wetland seed mix, if that would be, that would prosper in that sort of environment. And I know the rules speak of our orders of conditions that these, there has to be 75% cover at the end of a couple years, and it doesn't have to be from all 16 of these varieties, but there has to be 75% cover. So I had just looked around at some other possibilities because we've brought up seed mixes in the past for other projects. And have you investigated more of a specific, like marsh, swamp, and bog mix, something that would be more tolerant to shade and kind of wetter conditions?
Yes, there is a seed mix actually that DEP had recommended that we use as part of their comments through our Hopkinton Notice of Intent, and also I think through the 401 Water Quality Cert, there was a BVW seed mix that they had advised we use. I'm not familiar with the technical makeup of it, but the regulatory agency did request it, and we have used it on past projects, and it has worked.
Okay.
Sometimes I think part of having so many species is because of the understanding that some will make it and some will not.
Yeah.
And kind of the more you have, the higher likelihood that it will revegetate through a diverse group of plants. I understand your comment about shade. I think that that's definitely something to consider. We have used that conservation seed mix on past projects in similar circumstances on transmission rights of way. They haven't been as narrow as this, but they have worked. Typically, we do see low-growing communities come in over in the first growing season, and if it doesn't, we just have to keep reseeding until we get some type of establishment in that area.
Okay, and also, go ahead.
Yeah, just one comment on that. Oftentimes a discussion about sort of pre-made seed mixes like New England Wet Mix and the various seed mixes that New England Wetland Plants does out in Amherst, which generally have a good reputation. But I will comment that if the commission wanted, any seed mix can be custom made. If you said you wanted a seed mix with these 10 species, because these are the 10 species that are going to do best, there are companies out there that will make customized seed mixes for specific areas.
Yeah, that's been a kind of a recent revelation for me, especially with the Butterfield. We had recently revisited an order of conditions with a solar array off of Butterfield Drive, and that was a custom seed mix, and they had quite excellent results with that, because you can control how high it is, how much pollen they produce. So, yeah, I think that if that's amiable, you know, I think a custom seed mix, you know, very specific for this part of the project would be warranted.
Sure.
Because I know that when I looked at New England Seed Mix and this other company, Vermont Wetland Plant Supply, it had close to 16.2, and there was absolutely no overlap in the varieties. So it's just something to consider, considering that 2 years is kind of short. Mr. Verrill pointed out that we can also condition longer if we so desire, if that still stands. Because I think it's going to be a real, it's going to be a lot of competition between the invasives that are already there coming back and trying to reestablish plant life that's very specific to this environment. Okay.
Anything else? Oh.
I think I just wanted to talk about, I actually had one other thing. So when this is all finished, it looks like it might be a pretty nice actual path, you know, for visiting. Is there any instances where a pipeline like this, once it's restored, would be suitable for like a bog walk, or some way to open up the access to the public?
Sure, that's a good question. This right-of-way is a little different than some of our other transmission rights-of-way where we've actually built roads on, and a lot of times property owners, and it's within their right, will utilize the roads to walk dogs on or for recreation. A lot of times it depends on the specific rights for the project, and we just have an easement through the property, so you know we're entitled to go in and do things like inspections, but if someone else wanted to utilize the area, there are underlying property owners, so I think it depends on how the easement is written and what it allows for. So I'd have to get back to you on that. That would require us to look internally and see what rights, if any, of that nature we could provide. And I don't know for sure if even the folks that are walking on our transmission line should be or should not be, because it's not directly within my responsibility for environmental. It's more rights and survey issue. But I can get back to Megan on that.
Okay, well,
that
thank you.
question. Sure.
Yeah. Well, do you have anything else?
This one I would want to be different.
No, I'm all set, I think, too, from the comments that you made. I think,
It's wetland seed mix,
Yeah,
more for like
yeah,
open
and,
sunny areas. Yeah.
Matt, did you have anything else that you needed?
No, I don't think so. I think you guys covered it. I mentioned my few minor comments on the invasive stuff.
Yeah.
Megan, did you have anything you
More
needed?
specific, yeah.
I'm all set. I haven't had a chance to review the revised plans
Yeah,
that
I
they
know.
submitted last week,
None of
so
us.
you can go ahead and open it to the
Okay.
public.
I'm gonna open it to the public, but you need to recognize that it needs to be only about the wetlands. Okay, if you start going off trail, I'm gonna cut you short, okay? Because we really don't have that much time, and it is really only about wetlands, okay?
Okay. Am I recognized?
Yes, go ahead, and you
Okay.
need to give your name and address, please.
Mark DeSoni, 49 Hawthorne Road, Ashland, Mass. Been following this for, since beginning. Wetlands, the question from there is, through the Conservation Commission's October 30th report, there are photographs of wetlands in there. Made photograph from 2017, 2018 from Eversource still photographer who was taking the pictures. And to talk about the pipeline going through the wetlands at 20 to maybe 30 feet is going to be interesting at best. But I want just to say, excuse me, would it take view lines and stations to understand that it's going to take stoppage time
to make sure the flow is smooth? Yes or no?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Do you understand the question that he has? I don't know. It's really, I think, to you guys.
Okay,
Can you clarify it?
I try to clarify, because on the detail drawings, you have stations, certain stations that has breakers and pipe divided flows. And it's 20-foot easements, mostly. And then you got stations that has degrees of flow regulations that each pipe is gonna go through.
You're talking when it crosses streams?
Well, if you want, I'm trying to talk wetlands, but I'm also wanna go someplace else with, but I'm not sure if I can. I'm gonna ask if I can. Because this pipeline is gonna be more than just going through wetlands.
We're only responsible for the wetland part. So that's really where you need to focus your questions.
Okay, now let's say a residential borders wetlands.
It's not
And-
under our purview.
Well,
How
the
about-
wetlands are, but the residents are not.
The resident
What
would
about,
not be.
what about water tables?
No.
Would a water table be a wet area?
It's not part of the purview of our wetland resources.
Stormwater?
This isn't a stormwater one. It's about the wetland resources. Why don't you, can I ask you to go and formulate your question a little bit better and then come back?
Well,
How about you do that?
I'm only gonna have this one-time chance, cause
Okay.
I'm looking at that, but I'm also imagining there's more wetlands than just the, what's there. And I saw the COMCOM report October 30 with all the pictures, the aerial shots and easement combined with wetlands. What was looking at. And if it ever was that green and pristine, it'd be nice. But you're talking real ground, real diggings, and water, and also climate.
Can you get to your question?
I'm trying to formulate with looking at a computerized picture, which is kind of tough.
Okay, so what I would suggest is there's a lot of people behind you. Why don't we change around
Oh, okay,
and go
okay,
to
okay,
the
okay,
end
okay.
and come back?
Okay. Is your timeline reliable for the wetlands to be comparable to what you have up now?
So I think it's more, if you can mitigate, I think he needs to get the,
Oh, sorry, Matt.
if you can mitigate and bring it back to what it should be.
Yes, that's our intent, and just from experience on other underground projects, typically by setting aside the top feet of organic soil and then putting that back once we put the pipe in, there's some remaining root and seed stock in there that will revegetate the next year that helps supplement any type of seeding we do. So what we've seen is typically within 1 or 2 growing seasons it will come back. If we notice that there's any discrepancies between the way we've left it in pre-construction conditions, we would just continue having to work on that in order to get our certificate of compliance, obviously, and also in order to close out our SWIP with EPA, our Stormwater Pollution Prevention Plan. That's where the Mr. Wands was mentioning the 75% criteria. That's actually part of the SWIP requirements. We would just have to stay on top of it and make sure that this area was revegetated and put back to its pre-construction state.
Thank you. Name and address, please.
Hi, Diane Ring, 42 Bay Colony Drive. My question is about Article 97 in the state constitution, which has come up tonight, and also the role of DCR, the Department of Conservation and Recreation, and I don't completely understand the process in particulars, like I think there's a land swap proposed. And I think I would appreciate having a better understanding of the process and the timeline from Eversource's perspective, and if maybe Megan or another member of the, or a member of the commission would like to comment, I think it would be helpful also for the people watching at home. Thank you.
Matt, do you want to respond to that?
Sure. So my understanding of the Article 97 process, just to take folks back to the very beginning when we proposed the project, we had our MIPA site visit, which DCR attended, and they brought up that the current easement we have through the state park is a permit. It's a permit that allows, it's valid, that allows us to have the existing line there. But my understanding from talking to DCR is they wanted something a little bit more formal, because a permit is not the strongest document, if you will, for an easement of this nature. So they wanted us, in order to, what's the correct term, Sean, for the, it's not a permit, what's the one we're gonna get? A license. So right now there's a permit, and DCR is requesting that we get a license, and in order to get a license, we have to go through the Article 97 process. The way the land swap works is typically us and DCR will agree on some type of swap of land that we own that we will give to them. In this instance, I believe there's I can speak to this, right, Deerfield? There's a property, a small piece of property that we own in Deerfield by Mount Sugarloaf, the DCR. It's kind of a little missing tooth out of a larger piece they own, and they wanted that to make their piece contiguous. So that's the piece we're offering them as part of this process. In return, once the Article 97 process is done, we would have a license for this line. However, DCR did tell us that we do have the right to go ahead with this project concurrently with the process of getting the license, because the permit that we have now currently authorizes us to do that. It seemed to me from talking to them it was a little bit more of an administrative task, that they wanted to have a stronger license instead of a permit for this line, and in order to do that we had to go through the Article 97 process. But really, in the aggregate, it's not going to change how we conduct the project, and it's not going to affect our schedule at all, because we already have a permit to do the project according to DCR.
Thank you. So may I just ask for clarification quickly? So the Article 97 process, as I understand it, requires a vote of the legislature.
Yeah.
So I just want to understand.
Two-thirds vote from the legislature.
Right, thank you. So I just want to understand if this is something that would be required in this instance, given my understanding that whatever easement you have now, would that permit you to do that without Article 97?
Yes.
So I would just like to respectfully say that if you're proposing to leave 2 pipes in the ground instead of 1, I personally am not an expert, but I would consider that a change in the use of the easement that would also invoke an Article 97. And if anybody could confirm that, that would be great, and I will yield my time.
Yep, thank you, Diane. I don't have, that's not my place to answer that. I assume that would be the DCR's jurisdiction. But, the company's of the belief, that has not been communicated to us, that we needed an additional Article 97 process to obtain a license. It's just the one that they've already requested.
Rob St. Germain, 64 Winter Street. My question concerns the scoring algorithm that the gentleman spoke about. 50 years ago, when this pipeline was put in, we didn't think much about running pipelines through wetlands, and things have changed. We're a lot more aware of the value of these wetlands. So my question is, how old is this algorithm? I've used a lot of scoring algorithms in my career. I know you can weight an algorithm to the outcome you'd like to see. So has this algorithm been publicly vetted? Is it a proprietary algorithm of Eversource, or is it a public type of an algorithm? And is it open to question as part of this proceeding?
The algorithm, it was in our stuff.
So I'm personally of the opinion that the algorithm is not a part of this proceeding. However, it is public, and it was presented at the Energy Facility Siting Board hearings at which the town was an intervener. So I'm sure if that information would like to be obtained, I'm sure that could be obtained through the town's council or through your lawyers that are representing you in the legal proceeding with the FSB. But in my opinion, it doesn't, outside of the wetlands piece, the algorithm and how it, and the nexus between traffic and other scoring criteria is not part of this proceeding, in my opinion.
It was in the disc attachment F
Yeah,
that
their
we had.
application is available, it's public,
Yes.
to the siting board, but not relevant to this, other than when I raised it in comparison to other routes that they were considering.
On the Ashland, Mass website, there's a link that you can go to.
I'm more asking, what is the value given to the wetland in this algorithm as it compares to the value given to the other criteria? That's the main thing. So does this algorithm unfairly prejudice against the wetland? And I think that's a wetland question.
It's up to you, but I think we'd have to get it from, like you said, the siting board, what that is, how it's weighed.
Yeah.
Right? That's okay.
Yeah, I apologize, I don't have the algorithm in front of me, and we graded multiple categories. So I don't know what we scored each one off the top of my head. These are all numbers with decimal points, and, I'd have to be a savant to remember that. So I would respectfully request if you do want to obtain it, that is publicly available, as Mr. Hackinson mentioned.
Yep.
And it can be obtained, because the town was an intervener. It can be obtained through the town's lawyers, or I believe even a request to the siting board. There are ways of obtaining it.
On the Ashland, Mass webpage, there's also their attachment F. If you click on departments, you go to conservation, there will be columns on the left-hand side, one that says current projects. All of Eversource's revised materials are there. You'll see a document that's labeled Appendix F that goes over that criteria.
I think it's attachment.
It doesn't discuss the algorithms, though. It just discusses the
Scoring.
Yeah.
So I'm Chuck Lids, and I'm at 150 Oregon Road. So I should begin by saying I'm a social scientist. I'm not an expert in this in any way, shape, or form. However, I have a family member who has been doing research on wetlands for a number of years and now working for the EPA. And one of the things she tells me is that you never restore a wetland as well as it was before. So, okay, this is justified if it's necessary, if we have no other alternative. We have two alternatives. One is to put it in another place. The other alternative is that we don't build the damn thing at all, because, as I can provide you with evidence, within 5 years it'll be cheaper to do this in renewable fashion. So those are my main points. The one thing I wanted to ask is, if you end up approving this, please require that they come back over a number of years afterwards to deal with the invasives, because the invasives, however they deal with them now, they'll be back very quickly, much quicker than they're going to be than whatever they build.
Good guys.
So I hope you would do that.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Kathy Rooney, 136 Fountain Street. So first of all, I'm going to second what Mr. Lid said. And then I took notes up to this point, and so they're not necessarily in any order. The first thing I wanted to say is thank you to everybody on the commission for all the incredible amounts of time you've been putting in on this. Second is, one of the first things I heard here tonight was, quote unquote, attempt to provide the maximum amount of soil retention with the silt fence and the super silt fence. So what happens when the attempt fails? That's question number one. Question number two is they were talking about putting down the silt fencing for their project for the year. And that's a definite problem in the wetlands areas for all the wetland species, to say nothing of the upland species in the upland areas. But we're going to create impenetrable barriers for many, many creatures with that silt fence, and we need to be a lot smarter about that in this town and how that work gets done. It got brought up earlier, but they've got to close the trench every night. That's state law, and we don't want any animals falling in it, let alone children who go out there to see what's going on, because this is a really attractive nuisance at this point. There's going to be costs no matter what to the citizens, to the roads, and the wetlands, in my view, are the most expensive costs that we have. So when we run the route through the wetlands, that's more expensive than anything else. It's fairly easy to repair a road. It is incredibly hard and impossible to repair a wetland. So they're talking about the laydown areas. They're going to be doing staging. They're going to be doing refueling. They're going to have a lot of vehicles. They're going to have a lot of equipment. And we have nothing on that right now. We have no areas where that's going to be. And there's at least a mile, as Mr. Hackinson pointed out, between 2 points that are going through all the wetlands. I can't see how they're going to be moving big machinery that moves back and forth out of there to refuel it. They're going to be talking about it all being stationary machinery, and they're all going to, at the last minute, say, we have to bring little trucks out here and refuel. That just creates more places for accidents to happen. They're talking about the cleaning of the matting. They should be cleaning the matting before it comes onto any of our sites in Ashland. We got plenty of invasives here. We don't need any more. And I don't know how they do it. I don't know how it gets certified, but we need it to be certified, or we need to have one of our paid representatives on their site when this process happens, before these things come to our site. I would opt for them to bring water. Don't do stream drawdowns. I think that's a huge mistake. Whatever trees they're cutting down should be replaced to their size, or the equivalent of that size, and they get really expensive the larger they are, but we should get trees replaced, A, in this area, and B, around town. We need them around town in other areas. I totally agree with the plan about having a lot more detailed information about the invasive species in general and what their plans are for each area where there's invasives moving forwards. And I think they need to be coming back for a good 4 or 5 years minimum to look at the invasives. I'm still concerned that the easements, the 20-foot easements, aren't wide enough, despite what they've showed today. I think it's an incredibly narrow area. I'm also really concerned when you have silt fencing and plastic dam stuff stuck in the ground for a long period of time. What happens when they get pulled out and they're not fully intact? Where is the rest of the plastic, and who's going to go after the rest of that plastic so it's not out there polluting our wetlands, our streams, and everything downstream? We all have heard the stories about plastic and what it does. We don't need it. We don't want it. I would vote for the flume pipe as opposed to another big pipe that's pumping, because I think it's going to catch a lot of wetland animals and creatures in it. I would also vote for not only a mix of the herbaceous plugs and seeds that you were talking about, but also woody, because we need as much ideally as much shade out there as possible to come back, because that will help hold some of the invasive plants at bay. It's not gonna hold them all at bay, it's gonna hold some of them. The idea that the all mixed up soil is gonna reroot a lot of stuff, well, it's all mixed up. So a small fraction of it will reroot, but a lot of stuff is gonna be buried and irretrievably buried. It won't come back. Okay, and last but not least, I am increasingly frustrated to keep hearing this discussion about, well, everything's at the siting board, but our town didn't get a proper opportunity to answer the siting board information. It went into the siting board before we had a chance to review it properly. And what we got initially to review, this commission and many other different boards and agencies in town, was not complete. And we still have incomplete stuff, and we're still talking about, well, it's up to what the siting board wants for the route that Eversource picked, not the route that the town voted on picking. And
Stay on point.
I am on point,
Not on
because I don't want it through the wetlands. I don't think anybody in this room wants it from the wetlands except the people from Eversource. And if what I consider what happened is a dirty pool. Sorry, that's my end of my comments.
All right.
My name's Jerry Schelfeld. I live on Brayburn Lane. And no fair, she took all the good points. I came here, Carl, at the end of your comments about, I believe it was 6 alternatives, and I was struck by it still in the wetlands. And I frankly think your algorithm is hokey. You can do numbers all day long. I do it for a living. We can make those numbers, but none of the numbers, none of the algorithms produced an alternative out of the wetlands. And I know there's a road alternative that was squashed down, and we worried about kids crossing the street for school buses. We're comparing that to something that is so precious, we'll never retrieve it if we make a mistake. So I have wondered why we stopped the questioning, Carl. I think you're on such a very important point that their process, which they hold up as being valid, did not give us alternatives outside of the wetland. And to your credit, I don't believe anybody in this room wants the wetlands. One opinion. So I'm struck by what we didn't ask. I'm also struck, guys, when you showed your first picture of putting a galvanized wire fence to hold the wire in muddy water. What happens after the first year, second, third, fourth? Where is the commitment to the environment that assures us that we're not creating a problem by putting a metal pipe in muddy water? I sat there and said, I must have missed something, because you did it. And then the third, so my 2 points are, I don't think we've looked at enough alternatives. And their algorithm got in the way of looking at some of the other alternatives, including not even putting in Ashland. Sorry, that was editorial. So I would like to have you open up the discussion on our behalf that we should be pushing the alternatives further. I think it's a sin to go through the wetlands as shown on that drawing.
Right, and
So,
that's
I'm
on
done.
the siting board, yeah, that's.
I'm not on the
alternative's
siting
on the
board, I'm
siting
in your
board.
space, that
We
it
can-
goes across the wetlands.
Right,
And I
and we
don't
can
think
deny
that
it.
is right, period.
And that would be denying
Okay,
it, yes.
and please pursue that, because they don't control the discussion, you do, on our behalf. So I think it's important. And to Eversource, you've gone from 3 guys last time to 4 guys here. You don't seem to get the message. We don't want the pipeline, and there is no advantage to Ashland, period.
Go ahead. Go ahead, name and address.
Yep, Eddie Lutmer, 85 Fruit Street. The disruption that construction causes is evident every time we see construction in the street. It'll be the same in the easement, and you will want to have robust environmental monitoring going on that is independent of the proponent's design team and construction team. So make sure that that is provided for. and part of the order of conditions. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I got a better question. Yeah,
Just go ahead.
I formulated a little bit. Mark Tassoni. I wanted to ask a testing question, because you have to test the water and the soil around the wetlands to put down pipes, but you have to get the results back. How do you flag? Do you flag before testing, or after testing, or as the data comes in before you put the pipes in the wetlands?
Thank you.
Sure, so by flagging, I assume you're referring to the wetland delineation process. And that's, it's a field delineation that looks at 3 different criteria that we do this prior to any permitting, actually, so it's far before the pipe goes into the ground. And it's a process that looks at evidence of hydrology, which can be things like standing water, shallow roots, adventitious roots, which are roots shallow to the surface to get outside of standing water. It also looks at things like hydric soil. If you see any mottling or any glaying of soil, that's evidence that water has stood on soil for a long period, changing it from like a bright orange color to a glayed gray or white color. That's usually indicative of standing water. And the third criteria is evidence of what they call hydrophytic vegetation, which is vegetation that lives in wetlands more than 50% of the time. There's fac wet, and obligate. So if you have greater than 50% chance of facultative, fac wet, or obligate wetland species coupled by some sign of hydrology, that's where the wetland flag is hung, right on that boundary. So that is the process that SWCA followed when flagging the wetlands in the field, and it's standard process approved by Mass DEP and the Army Corps. Once those lines are delineated, the commission will approve them or make minor adjustments, and then the work would be conducted in accordance with whatever the lines were at that time.
Thank you. Thank you. Name, address?
Hi, I'm Andrea Green, 66 Cross Street. I'm here tonight. I'd also like to thank you for all the work that you're doing to investigate this and represent the town. My comments tonight are that I do not support having the pipeline in Ashland at all, because I feel like the amount of cost in terms of environment or money is just not worth it with fossil fuels being on the way out. I also feel that no matter how much mitigation would be done to the wetlands, that we would not be able to restore them in any way to the condition that they were before any pipes were laid. I also feel that a 20 or even a 30-foot wide easement will just not be sufficient to be able to move the machinery in and out of that area in the wetlands, because there are no entry points to that area along that whole stretch that some have said is almost a mile. I don't know how long it is, but I feel that there'll be a lot of damage just from moving that machinery in and out of that area. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Barbara Schwab, 20 Indian Spring Road. I know you guys are amazing because you've been doing so much work on this. I come to all of these meetings, and I just am so angry that Eversource thinks that they can just come in here and, because they have an easement, do whatever they want to the wetlands. You can dig up my backyard, go ahead, because I'm on your pipeline. But leave the wetlands alone. You think you can come in here and just tell us, well, this is what we did before. This is what we have. We have easements. We have all this.
Redirect comments to you.
Okay. Yeah.
Oh.
Direct those to here. not
Okay.
to them.
Sorry,
please.
can't help it.
Okay, I understand, but redirect it.
We have to stop the wetlands, them going through the wetlands, no matter what else we do. Someone said that 50 years ago when they put these lines in, we didn't know what we did now. We're like, okay, I bought my house knowing there was an easement on it, but I don't live on wetlands. There has to be some compromise. And I don't understand why Eversource can't compromise and aren't tired of dealing with all of our backup and telling them what they can't, what is really bad for our town. And our town needs to decide whether we want to deal with the traffic, not them. They can't tell us what to do. I think we need to stand strong and fight them all the way with this one.
Thank you.
For the record, the pipeline is 65 years old, not 50 years old.
Even older.
Rob St. Germain, just one more quick comment. I'm also a member of the Town Forest Committee. When it wasn't a gas pipeline, it was a transmission line, and they basically misrepresented what they were going to do on their right-of-way. They destroyed the habitat up there. We had an eastern towhee habitat. They clear-cut it. Basically, if you are forced to take on this project, I urge you to build in a substantial amount of monitoring to keep these people honest, because I'm sure these gentlemen that are here are fine gentlemen. This is their job. They're doing the best they can. But basically, they represent a corrupt company. Thank you.
Thank you. Name and address, please.
Deborah Griffin, 44 Roberts Road. I'm also here to say that I also think that it's not good for the wetlands and for the town, and that 20, 30 years for them to grow back, and I doubt they will get back to the way they are.
Okay.
So I'm against it.
Thank you. Okay. Anything else? Nobody? Okay. Anybody else? No?
Jackie Caroni, Brayburn Lane. I just want to corroborate everything I've just heard. It's been a great night because we've heard a lot of good information. And no offense to Eversource, I totally understand where they're coming from. It's a business, they're doing their job. And when you're presenting like this, you're so used to getting around the questions with no specific answer. I just encourage you guys, because you're all we have at this point, to make sure whatever questions are raised, you have a specific written answer to every single thing about the wetlands and for the wetlands, because you're right, we won't ever get anything back. And it's not their fault. I don't mean anything to them. So we're relying on you guys to carry this through for us, from your perspective, just from the wetlands perspective. And we hope it doesn't go through, but it sounds like it's totally a done deal.
Thank you.
We also have a video recording now.
I'm sorry?
We also have a video recording.
Oh, yeah.
WACA-TV is recording it.
Okay. Did we want to continue it?
What are you guys looking to do?
We have all these comments. Did we?
We still have a lot of stuff that we have not really gotten a chance to look at, is why.
Sure. Yeah, we want to give you as much opportunity as possible to review the information we've provided. So I think we would request a continuance probably to
The 23rd.
23rd. Yeah. What's the meeting after the 23rd, given that?
January 13th.
January
2020.
13th.
Is it January 13th? That's when the first, okay. It's up to you.
Yep. So, yes, let's continue until the 13th.
Okay.
And,
Can I have a motion?
Yeah, I move that this project be continued for meeting again on January 13th.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you,
Thank you.
guys.
Okay.
Thank you.
Greg, you seconded?
Meeting's still open. Should we close it?
Oh, start to close it?
That whole hearing
Did we
is
just-
closed.
we
We're
just-
deliberating.
I make a motion, can you guys move to close the public hearing?
Oh, I move that we close this public hearing?
No, we don't want to do it. No,
No.
no. Wait a second. No, we don't want to do
So full
that.
statement of what.
We just continued it.
Carl,
Carl,
What?
microphone.
you don't
was your,
want to
question?
do that. You don't want to.
We don't want to, the meeting, end the meeting.
No, no, no.
No, we don't want to adjourn the meeting.
Adjourn the meeting, yeah.
Hmm?
Gene is still waiting there, isn't he?
I don't know.
When I adjourned, yeah.
We don't want to, you're talking about adjourn the meeting.
Yeah, not close the hearing, but
Yeah. adjourn
close the meeting, or adjourn it,
I'm
yeah.
like, wait a second, what are you
Yeah.
talking about?
Terminology.
This is, huh?
Oh, that, we have to adjourn?
Are we still gonna do the,
Minutes?
I don't know.
But Gene
That's
and
what-
Bill is not here, the Gene left again.
Megan, are we gonna do the minutes still, or do you wanna wait until the next meeting, or what do you wanna do with the rest of the stuff that we gotta do? Can we do it with the 4?
I've got bills.
Oh, she's got Bill's notes on the meeting minutes, so we could do the minutes.
Yeah, why don't we, let's get the minutes out of the way.
Okay. We're losing Carl.
Hang on, we don't have a quorum yet.
Just wait for Carl to come.
Thanks, Matt. Nice to see you.
Wait.
Yeah, because
Matt, thank you.
can Gene come back? Is he,
Matt, thank you.
Oh, you can.
does he want to
Merry
come back?
Christmas.
I don't really.
Oh, yeah, Merry
Merry Christmas. Happy holidays.
Yeah,
Yep.
you bet.
Carl, we're gonna do the minutes.
Yep.
We have quorum now, right?
We have a quorum.
Okay, good. Let's,
Where's,
she's got
is
Bill's
Gene?
notes
Gene's
too.
not coming back?
Nope, he left.
I think they're both left.
No, Gene was sitting there.
He was sitting there, but he left.
He just left now?
He left a few minutes ago, a
Wow.
while ago.
We can always table these for next time. I mean,
Well, I don't know.
you're welcome, yeah.
Thank you. So, what do we wanna, do you wanna just hold it? Thank you. Do we wanna just do it the next time?
It's up to you, but we still have to sign documents.
Do we need to sign documents?
We have
I
a
make
draft
motion
order.
that we table these meeting minutes till,
Yeah, but we gotta
December
do
23rd.
the, signed documents. Carl, don't leave, cause we have to sign some documents.
yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah,
But he has already
you're welcome.
made a motion to table it though.
Did you make a motion?
Yeah,
To
I
table it?
second that.
Okay, second. Okay, all in favor of tabling the minutes till the next meeting?
oh, yeah, okay.
Is that okay?
Okay, so we can sign the documents though, and then get out of here.
Yeah, let's give Gene and Bill a chance to weigh in on the meeting minutes.
Yeah, but she's got Bill's notes, but that's okay. I'm not gonna worry about it.
Oh, boy.
Sure.
Did we have a motion? Oh, we haven't adjourned yet.
Sign the paper.
Can we sign the papers after we adjourn, Kathy?
Huh?
No.
Do we have to sign them in session?
We have to sign something.
We don't have to be in session, though. Can we adjourn?
I don't know. He's still got the thing on too. You want-
I imagine you could,
I
because I've
understand.
come here after
Yeah.
meetings and signed.
Okay, motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We adjourn, but we can still sign the document.